I've got a whiskey in my glass here that I would consider quite modern and maybe in some ways innovative, but it's still very much a traditional product. So, Roddy and I were involved in a discussion recently, and he brought this idea to me that it would be nice to have a vPub where we talk about the concept of a traditional whiskey and then talk about the tension, as he described it, the tension between the occasional case for considering where we could perhaps be constrained when it comes to innovation. So I've spent today and yesterday kind of going through things and just kind of processing a lot of this idea, this tension between innovation and tradition, and what Scotch whisky is today, how traditional a product it actually is, and how much flexibility there is there to allow a little bit of innovation in the future. That's the topic tonight. And yes, we do have Roddy in the building. I'll see you all in a second. Hello, whiskey folk. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the vPub. Welcome to another Thursday night. I hope you're all doing very, very well. Roddy is backstage, let's say, making me some kind of, let's call it a traditional drink. He's become famous for bringing these mixed drinks and he's kind of breaking whiskey style cocktails and things like that. He's sometimes broke the vPub in the past doing it. Certainly broke me. And he's backstage making us a wee drink to enjoy together tonight. Something on theme. I've no idea what it is. I know what it's called. I don't know what the ingredients are. So when he serves it up to me, we'll have a wee sip of that, and I suppose I can give my live reaction in real time. So that's what Roddy's doing just now, and that gives me a wee minute to welcome in some of you, beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies. I did want to kind of summarise before Roddy came in the weekend that's just passed because it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And I don't want to talk about it from the perspective of what a great time we had. Isn't it a shame that you weren't there? I want to talk about it just to celebrate the people that were there and encourage the people who didn't make it this time that there are going to be gatherings like that in future because it was so much fun. It was so good for our mental health. It was so good just to get together and render our virtual space real. It was absolutely incredible. But I'm not going to dwell on that right now. Maybe when Roddy arrives, if you remind me, I'm probably going to be distracted by the whiskies that he brings along, but I'll use Jim Novice's mat to remind me that we can maybe talk about it together when Roddy's here, because of course Roddy was there on both days of the weekend last week. Right now, though, I'm going to waste no time, no more time, and I'm going to jump straight into the lounge. So much orange, so many of you in, fantastic. Knocking on for 250 of you in, and we've only just opened the door to talk about what I think is quite a geeky subject. I think it's quite, in a lot of respects, it's quite nebulous. And I was wondering about how many people would be interested to talk about that concept. But I get the impression that most of you are just kind of happy to hang out here on a Thursday night and kind of get your whiskey fix, right? With all the other beautiful whiskey folk and barflies. Let's jump in and welcome some of them. I'm looking for the orange, like I always do. So if you're trying to get my attention, your best bet is with orange. Blair Stevenson. Got to meet Blair at the weekend for the first time ever. He's in. Good to see you, Blair. He's saying evening all evening. Welcome, Blair. Good to have you, buddy. North Coast Drama is here as well. Good evening, Roy, and all other barflies. Good to have you, North Coast Drama. Hope you're sitting comfortably and you have something nice in the glass. Benny Fries is here. Lowlander is here. Ireland Hopper Stewart is saying, evening, Roy. Oh, to have been in Glasgow in November. Another year, perhaps. Stuart, stay focused. And you're not too far. A lot of people came much, much further than where you are, my friend. But it was so encouraging and it was so much fun that we will have more in the future. Hellswood is here. Good to see you, Helen. Missed you at the weekend. It would have been fantastic to have you along as well, of course. Ben Demon Hunter, howdy, Slancha, Varoy, and all the barflies. Good to have you, Ben. I hope you're keeping well, my friend. Rob Halford is here. Fantastic, Rob. Rob was there on the weekend as well. He can testify as to how much fun it was. James Morgan is here. Stefan Novak, he was here at the weekend. and it was brilliant to have him. Malt Brother Ray saying, "Good evening, Roy. Isn't innovation and tradition in the whiskey industry? Isn't innovation a tradition in the whiskey industry?" Malt Brother Ray saying, "You know, that's a really good Ray. If I remember to use that as an opener, I might do so. But absolutely, buddy." Jimmy Legg is saying, "I still don't want a computer in any distillery. Take that," says Jimmy Legg. And we have Roddy bringing glasses of booze. Let's make some space for you, fella. It's mildly hot. Okay, so we have a winter drink here. A winter drink. Get comfy, and I'll make sure that. Let's just hope that the camera can focus on both. I've moved the camera back a bit tonight, so hopefully they can see us. Roddy, welcome back behind the vPub. It's always brilliant to have you, buddy, especially when you bring fun drinks.
We hold this up to the camera.
Aye.
There is whiskey in this.
So this is a whiskey-based drink. Can anybody see the steam that's coming off it? I don't know if I hold this up.
Can you see the steam?
It's certainly there's steam in the room, but maybe the camera's not picking it up right. So we have a glass of warmed up Coke. Is that what's happening here?
This is a extremely traditional drink called Smoking Bishop.
A Smoking Bishop, or just it's called Smoking Bishop?
Smoking Bishop, without the article. I think most people would hot Vimto.
Oh my goodness!
Most people that would have come across it if you've ever read A Christmas Carol. At the end of that, when Scrooge is reformed and welcomes Bob Cratchit in to say that things are going to be different, he pours him a glass of Smoking Bishop.
Is that right?
Yeah. But so this is
a Dickensian.
Well, it's a drink that was like all over 19th century literature. People were drinking things like Smoking Bishop.
So Dickens and Christmas Carol, would they set and be 19th century? Just remind me, it was 19th century.
Yeah, like the 1850s. I'm not sure. And he was writing some of his, something like that. Yeah.
Would it have been whiskey?
No, that's the twist. Of course, there's always a twist.
There's always a Roddy twist. So right.
This is.
He's not going to ask me to pick out the whiskey that's in it.
I wouldn't do that. So this is the book that I got the recipe from, because of course when you're reading a novel or whatever, they don't give you the recipe.
No, they just tell you what the drink is, and that's it. Yep.
So, in fact, sorry, I'm kind of wandering as usual. So
that's why you're here. That's what you're best at. Just wander away.
I'd pitched to you the idea of talking about tradition and innovation and how that's. I think there's a tension there.
Yes, that's right.
So then I was thinking, well, I also want to have something interesting to drink. Obviously, we've got some good whiskies, but I do like to play around with my drams. So this book, Aeneas MacDonald's book, which I'm sure many of you will have read, towards the back of it, there's a whole series of drinks that where he describes as being traditional. So I was looking into doing them, but they're quite complicated. There's one called Old Man's Milk that involves beating egg, which I wouldn't want to do that live.
The name needs changing. I didn't fancy a glass of Old Man's Milk. Thanks for bringing the Smoking Bishop. That's much more palatable.
So he mentions a variety of drinks that I thought were too complicated. So then I knew about Bishop because I love Dickens. So this book does give a recipe. So I'll tell you the recipe.
Should I not guess? I'm desperate to get my face in it here.
Aye, taste it.
And I know I interrupted welcoming some of you in, but I'll try and do as much of that as I can throughout tonight. It's always difficult whenever I get. Anyway, cheers.
Aye, cheers.
Cheers, fella. Is it to your liking? Is it okay? You just. I feel like I
could get
steaming up my specs.
It's potent. It's potent. Also, making it hot means that it burns your nostrils.
It's not as hot as I expected, and it doesn't taste potent at all.
Well,
it's a wee bit like is there smoky whiskey in this?
Yes.
Right, because it's a wee bit like a smoky. What's it called? A Christmas mulled wine. Mulled wine.
Okay, so you've kind of nailed it, Roy, because the smoking bishop, the traditional recipe is you take wine. Well, so you start. It says a little bit
very winey,
complicated,
yeah.
Yes. So you get some oranges, some oranges, and you bake them in the oven until they're brown.
Oh, so there was some preparation in advance.
Yes, indeed. And then you stud them with cloves, and then you put them in a container with a bottle of red wine. It suggests Portuguese wine, but I used
just an infusion type container thing, right?
You do that overnight or longer, and you then take the oranges out, squeeze them to add the juice of the oranges. Then you add a bottle of port, and then you fortify it with brandy. But because it's the vPub, I fortified it with
Whisky.
A Kalila, to be precise, for that, because it's smoking bishop, so I thought a smoky whiskey.
Right, absolutely, it makes perfect sense to me.
And according to the book here, the best time to make this is when it's Seville oranges, which in the 19th century came into the country in February and March. But you fortify it with brandy as it was then, because then it keeps until winter time.
And back then, brandy would have been a more popular drink.
Than
certainly Scotch whiskey.
Yes.
So you are on theme. Typically, Roddy, on theme.
It's just something a wee bit different, and it kind of works. I think you can still taste the Scotch.
I think the Scotch is. I would probably, if I was going to experiment with this and make it on my own, I think I would add a wee bit more of the whiskey, just to kind of
make it stronger.
Wow, there's the point, right? It's about balance, right? And because it's a whiskey, I'm probably looking for whiskey in a drink where it probably shouldn't be. The previous one might not have supposedly tasted like brandy forward, and this one's probably not supposed to be Scotch forward. But because you've used a smoky whiskey, it's make its presence known, right? But orange juice, wine, cloves, absolutely everything makes sense. So if you were going to garnish this, I don't know, save some of the burnt orange, or you don't need to garnish it, because they wouldn't have garnished this.
There's no chat about that in the book. I tell you what, though, some of the other recipes are. There's one that I didn't make.
I think I am getting a wee buzz out of it. I better be careful.
I know, it's quite strong.
Was it cast strength Kalila?
Yes.
Okay, typical Roddy. Roddy's back. Roddy's back.
So there was a drink that I would have loved to have made, because of the name. It's Moonbeams for Summer Drinking, which involves Madeira and then brandy. It was going to be Scotch, but then also you put toast in
it. You hinted at this one,
but
this is when it's all becoming fussy, right? With the beaten eggs and the toast and the things.
Yeah. So making the toast and everything would have been. And when I made that reverse Rob Roy, except I didn't, for sure, if it was too complicated.
What you ended up making was a reverse Rod Roy. Is what it's picking out.
I just made it. So this was pre-prepared.
What episode was that you made that one? Do you remember what it was called?
The Breaking Whisky episode.
Was it the Breaking Whisky episode? So if you're interested it was a mistake. Roddy opened up the vPub that night, going live making a cocktail, and he brought it down here. And then somebody pointed out in the chat that he'd mixed up the ingredients. And we were very happy after about 15 minutes of the vPub. I sense that if I'm not careful with this drink, that it might be a wee bit like that tonight. But you brought some more of it in a wee bottle. This is cool.
Well, this is the ridiculous thing, that I wasn't paying attention to the quantities, so I've ended up with 3 bottles worth of this.
Well, if you're going to go through the trouble, right?
2 bottles of wine, the juice of 3 oranges, and then a quarter bottle of cast strength whiskey. So,
yeah, I'm quite happy. Do I get to keep this though?
You can do, yes. You
so,
certainly can.
Can I keep that in the fridge then? That's going to keep, isn't it? It's fortified. So.
Well, it seems the book suggests that you make it in February and it's good for Christmas. So,
plenty of time.
Plenty of time.
And I can just, when folk come round and they're looking for something, I can just warm up in the pan.
Yeah.
There you go, a wee winter warmer. We're turning the heating off this winter, so we can warm them up with booze instead.
Instead of just mulled wine, it's smoking bishop.
Fantastic. Would you like a smoking bishop? What's that? Would you like?
Well, now.
Yeah. Well, now I get a story for you. 19th century. Well, mulled wine would have been old as well, no doubt. I think it's a very good kind of opener to kind of transport us back in time a wee bit, to kind of start what we're going to talk about tonight. I've mentioned to you, I think the way that we would like to do this to try and keep it somewhat interesting is maybe go back in time and try and focus on some hard points that would have defined what we have as Scotch whisky today, right? So then at that point we can say, okay, so what we've got in front of us here is mostly made up through these hard points. Where do we want to go from there? But what I think Roddy and I are both in alignment here, we don't really want to campaign for anything. I don't think we want to state that this should change, that should change, but ask a question, what if it could? And aren't rules all, especially when it comes to definitions and regulations that we have, and look at how they've come to the art today. They've not always been fixed. They've been refined and changed and modified. And I think that's the idea. And if that happens in the future, what could benefit in Scotch? What could benefit the consumer? What could benefit the drinker? And does that fall under the banner of innovation, I suppose? I sense that the way that's going straight to my nervous system right now.
Probably put that to one side. Not have any more of it till later.
I might need to be super focused to get through it. Actually, I've already forgotten because my notes are sitting over there, but if I need them, I'll go over and get them. What I want to do, I want to spend a minute while everyone's in, and I haven't been welcoming people like I normally do. I hope that's okay. I'll try and catch up with them throughout the night. There's a hell of a lot of people in. There's over 300 in. Roddy, we had a magic weekend, did we not?
Aye, it was a blast.
It was terrific.
The festival was...
Well, you were working the festival. Roddy, you were working.
So yeah, the club volunteers function as...
Some of the club volunteers?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you would need all the members, I think the team's a good size. But yeah, providing the water carriers and keeping the exhibitors in tea and coffee and just helping with any inquiries and handing out obviously all the stuff at the start.
Yeah.
And having one or two wee drams as well.
Well, that's good that you do get a chance to have one or two wee drams.
There was one table, the New York Distilling Company.
Yes, yeah.
Because I had the lanyard.
Yes.
So I approached that table with two jugs in each hand to replace their water, and he just grabs my cut glass and pours in a wee sample.
So it's not a lanyard with ID on it; it's the lanyard with a Glencairn glass hanging from it.
Yes.
So you're doing your job with whiskey hanging from your neck, which isn't bad. Well, you're not getting paid, so you should take it. And
and there was so many people there that I know. I think I said to people, the great thing about Glasgow's Whisky Festival is that you see 100 or 200 of your whisky acquaintances and friends in one day instead of
it's a very efficient way of catching up with people. Aye, absolutely.
And then Sunday the in-person challenge.
Yes,
that was quite a gathering.
I know it was a stonking, fantastic, just life-affirming wee gathering of people. I was talking to Roddy earlier. We're not talking about things that divide us like politics and sports and all these other crazy sensibilities. We're just in the room soaking it up. Maybe we've been deprived of it over the last 2 or 3 years, but it was just smiles. It was happy people. It was just superb. You've done the blind challenge before. Obviously, you've joined me in the vPub and things like that to do it. But when we do it live, it's a team game. So Roddy was one of the team captains. He headed up the Roddy's team.
We didn't put any effort into a team name at all.
That's right. The eventual winners was my friend Bill came over, one of the furthest travelled from California. He captained the disciples and they took the plaudits because the youngest guy at the gathering, Alfie, well done Alfie, got a perfect score.
10 out of 10.
He got a perfect score. He's the only guy in a room of 55 people, 54 people participating, that managed to get a perfect score. So well done, Alfie. Absolutely. But for everybody that made it, thank you for just being there. Thank you for just going with it and trusting us as they come in the door. Sevi's standing with his tombola. They're picking out what table they're going to be sat at, and they don't know they're sitting next to strangers potentially. There's a team captain already installed in place. Fantastic job by all the team captains. And then everybody's in it together, just playing along, just trying to fathom their way through this blind challenge. And then at the end of it, people bring along bottles that they want to share, but they're not bringing along bottles of Talisker 10, are they? I mean, there were a couple of just really nice kind of core range products, absolutely fantastic. But some of the things on there are unicorns, right? They're just,
I thought it was funny that it was, like everybody there's an enthusiast, well along the road of their whiskey journey. So as you say, there wasn't much in the way of core range. But I think it was Sevy was complaining about halfway through the evening that the Springbank 10-year-old hadn't been opened yet.
That's right.
Even which has turned into a kind of a unicorn drum.
That's right. That was nuts. That we're like, okay, wow, there's Springbank here, but look at all this other stuff that I want to try, and things. It wasn't about the cost. It wasn't like, oh, here's a really rare unicorn from, it was unicorns that people had brought from where they travelled from, maybe local whiskies. It was things that people had stashed away. Again, Sevy brought things he'd been saving up, a 50s, a 60s, a 70s, and I think an 80s blend. So you could have spent a whole night just sitting there going through a flight of old blends if you wanted, and a lot of people did. There were people, we got one of the best ones, one of the ones that struck me was that Lark Tokai cask. I don't know if you got to try it. It was one in a really flat bottle.
Oh, yes, I did.
And it was one that was donated by Glenn Duncan. So I took that along, fully known. Westland, a couple of Westlands that I took in, and a Westward from Jay Chong that he donated.
The one that was new to me was Smogan.
That's right.
Smogan?
Yeah, Schmogan.
Because Stefan talked to me about that, and I tasted it, and it's it's not I don't taste many Scandi whiskies, because obviously in the shop people come to us for Scotch, so we don't get many. And that was fascinating.
Well, do you know,
such a good whiskey.
My son's got a favourite drink, and it's just cordial, blackcurrant cordial, right? But it's double strength now to save in packaging.
Yeah.
But nowadays you've got a smaller bottle that's quadruple strength, even smaller. That's Schmogan for me. That's why it's in such wee bottles. It is so dense. It is so compact. It's one of these drams that I think it's not easy to enjoy in a flight. You need to sit with it because it's just so dense. Now I'm not sure I tried the one that you had on Sunday night, but I've got some down here in the corner there, and that's like that. That's from Stefan as well. Stefan's the Schmogan supplier. David Hong has bought us a wee dram, Roddy, to get things going tonight. Fantastic. No comment, David. Just a wee generous dram from you. I'm going to be brave. Say cheers, David. Terrific. All right. I'm hoping that everybody's being very welcoming in the lounge, like you always are, because I'm doing a rubbish job of welcoming folk tonight. That tends to be what happens when I've got a guest alongside me. It's just the way it is. But it's been monologues from me the last 3 or 4 weeks, apart from the Oswaz thing. So I hope that that's okay, and you're just getting to chat to each other tonight. How far do you think we would have to go back in time to kind of start to define or find some hard points for the whiskey that we enjoy today? The whiskey that looks like this, the whiskey that smells vaguely like this and tastes vaguely like this. Because if we go back to Friar John Corr and his 8 balls of malt, the record in the Exchequer rolls of the 15th century, we would not be talking about whiskey it's very unlikely to look anything like this. Am I right? Would you say? There's a chance, I suppose. Some of it might have come from an oak cask. But generally speaking, malt was enjoyed as soon as it came off the still. And it would have been often a clear spirit, right?
Yeah. There's those records, the narrative around the... do you remember the Bruichladdich did that quadruple distilled spirit?
The X4, that's right.
Yeah, which they'd found references to a practice in the past. I can't remember, is it even the 17th century in Islay, where they would have the normal whiskey, and then they would have the triple distilled for special occasions, and the quadruple was if you were at death's door, and it would either dispatch you or save you.
That's right.
I can't imagine what that was like. I think in terms of, I know we were sort of talking about the timeline for Scotch, but something that I didn't touch on that is the earliest reference I can see to something like this is clearly oak matured or barrel matured is Elizabeth Grant's diary.
Oh,
You
Rothy
know,
Marcus.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
What was that? Notes of a Cellar Lady or
a
something?
Highland lady. Notes of
Is that
yeah.
what it is? Yeah.
And it's where she's complaining about her father demanding that she gives up her best cask for the king.
Yes.
And you know, she describes the whiskey as being long in the wood, mild as milk, with the true contraband goo.
That's
G-O-U-T.
right. Yeah,
with
yeah.
its true contraband taste.
Yeah.
And that, you know, I love that description because that's.
Was she the one that talked about long and uncorked bottles as well?
Yeah, that's ringing a bell.
Yeah. A mild as milk. That's
Mild-
right.
Yeah.
With the true Highland goo. That's right. I remember that.
And she had to give it up for the visitors.
That's
She'd
right.
give you the rage, that would.
That's right. Well, the rage enough to make a note of it in our cellar book.
Yes,
right? So,
indeed. Aye, but you know in terms of what we are drinking today, I think it's it's relatively recent. You know, I think that it's evolved over time, and I guess it would all.
Well, I suppose we can agree then that the only thing that's laid down then in the 15th century when we're talking about provide Friar John Corr with these 8 balls of malt is the malt. So that's like Genesis, I suppose, for our discussion tonight. There's a good chance that there was distilling in Scotland, Ireland, elsewhere before that record in 1494. But what we're talking about, generally speaking, with exceptions, if we say things tonight and we say it, everything has to be caveated with the fact that generally, the broad brush, it was malt. It was barley, malted barley. But there's every chance that it was often something else. But there is clearly stated 8 balls of malt. They're talking about barley, right? So we're talking about grain. And that was what was prevalent, what was available, and what they used to make it back then. We have to go forward a long time before we get to any other hard points. If we come forward to, I mean, it's interesting that what we don't want to talk about tonight, because it's another vPub, technology has impacted our whiskey, no doubt. We could talk about the technology, the Industrial Revolution, all the things that's impacted whiskey in that way. That's not necessarily what's defined the whiskey that we enjoy today. It could have existed theoretically without some of those technological, maybe not as efficiently, maybe with a slightly different flavor, but it could have still existed. So, and also kind of the events that happened. So phylloxera, we don't want to dwell on phylloxera tonight because that was a huge impact on Scotch whisky and the scale of it and potentially how Scotch whisky was made and consumed, the explosion of Scotch in the 19th century. But Scotch was already defined by then. 1644 is the next kind of hard point. But did that really change whiskey? I think maybe a wee bit. 1644 is when the government decided we're going to tax your whiskey production. So what does that do? Instead of it being in farmhouses and it being in, I don't know, churches, cathedrals, and where monasteries, I suppose, or wherever they were making whiskey in domestic environments, suddenly it disappears and it ends up illicit distilling. And then we go through a huge period of super interesting development and jostling where the Steens and the Haigs, they come to prominence and things. They're the industrial, they're the heavy. They're able to legally make whiskey. The Highland Line division. So all the illicit distilling is going on north of the Highland Line and it's been smuggled. That could theoretically have started to change whiskey because there was a differentiation in flavours then. But I think you have to go all the way to 1823 before there's a definitive intervention, the Excise Act, that defines how modern Scotch whisky, legal Scotch whisky, is going to be made. And that is still not about oak casks, still not about maturation. It's still not about ABV or strength or anything. It's just about the size of the still and how you will make it, how you will build your distillery, your legal distillery, in order to let the government get their hands on the duty.
So the government can measure what you're doing and apportion the correct tax.
So that's going to have affected things, but that's not really, we're not defining the flavour, are we, at that point?
I don't think so, no. I mean, there would have been an unintended effect on flavour because there was a minimum still size.
Which was a bloody big still size.
Yes.
And that was, again, to specifically make all these little stills that were domestic stills or small scale production stills redundant overnight. Sorry, Roddy.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that you know, the overt purpose of that was to make enforcement easy. You know, it's harder to hide a 500-gallon still than it is a 50-gallon still.
That's right. That's right.
But the unintended consequence would be that the true contraband flavour
ends up being made in the wee stills.
Yeah, and that becomes much harder for people to get hold of because of the new act. You know, like obviously there's still going to be illicit distillers, but a lot of people are like, okay, fine, I'll give up. You know,
aye, that's right.
Or
that's right.
like
George Smith.
Like George Smith.
Yep.
He's like, fair enough. Then I'll pay my tenner. I'll come out into the open.
But he was threatened.
Aye,
he was,
aye.
you know, all these illicit distillers, and
so the act's not about flavour. You know, it's about control, but it does have a consequential effect on flavour.
Absolutely, it does. And that's that definition in 1823. There's been lots of things that's happened since, but that's pretty much because if you build a big distillery, it's going to last for 200 years, and that's what we've seen. It's still there. It's still that those distilleries, Glenlivet and George Smith's case. Okay, I know we moved to a new distillery and things, but these have been built specifically for that purpose, to conform to that act. And so that's the footprint then laid down of what Scotch whisky distilling is going to look like in the future. And that was 200 years ago. But then if we move forward into flavour, if we look throughout to, there's a slight, I don't know if we agree or disagree on this, but for me, after the Excise Act comes in 1823, we see this blossoming of new legal distilleries. People are buying these really inexpensive licenses because the government know it's a good way to get money in. So these big legal genuine distilleries start to replace illegal distilling, and generally, apart from more of rural areas, legal distilling starts to fade. And then we see maybe 10 or 20 years of stability, but during the 20s and 30s, we see another thing come in, and I see it as a fracture point in Scotch whisky. And that's when Steen brings his continuous still, and then that's refined by Ananias Coffey in the 30s.
1830s, just to...
Yeah, sorry, the 1830s, yeah. So very quickly after that, they've because it's legal now, there's a drive to do this efficiently, as efficiently as possible. Steen, one of the biggest whiskey-making producing families, the Steens, was it Robert Steen that invented the still? I can't remember.
I think so, but
I almost said Jock Steen.
Somebody will...
Somebody will know what Steen is.
Graham
Fraser, if he's in tonight, he'll know. But he makes his continuous still with a drive to make this efficient, continuous distillation product, as opposed to a pot still batch, you know, drain and fill and recharge and all of that kind of thing. This is continuously running still. But Ananias Coffey brings along his coffee still, which is still the design that's been used today, more or less. And that changes everything. But that's making a different product. Malt whiskey in a batch still and a pot still is a different drink from any old grain. Sorry, not any old grain, from grains generally through a continuous still. In my mind, these are... And
there we are, Robert Steen.
Robert Steen. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Philip Story.
Or maybe it is Jock Steen.
Jock Steen. Jock Steen. Steen, I just had it in my head, and obviously. But we've got two absolutely flavour definable different drinks, to my mind. There are some malt whiskies that taste a wee bit like a light grain whiskey. There are some heavier grain whiskies on a long maturation or whatever that can come off as a malt. No doubt, there's an overlap. But to me, grain and malt whiskey are different things, and I think that we might end up discussing some things that I think that's one of the challenges that the SWA has, is trying to define an umbrella policy for what's essentially often two different drinks or two different products. But this is just me speaking.
Well, I mean, from quite early on, after the column still was introduced, you see people talking about column still whiskey as a silent whiskey, silent in the sense of not saying anything, of not having flavour. So there's a very, very quick recognition that yes, it's super efficient. You've got a super clean, pure product, but it's neutral. You don't. From early on, people know they're not making column still whiskey for flavour. They're using it as a filler ingredient.
Which is why it ends up in the lap of the grocers to make a blended product using the grain and then flavouring it with malts to the profile. This is before branding was even a thing, right? For their customers. So yes, they're making a uniform drink from these two products, but there are two products. There are malt distilleries out there, legally licensed, and then along comes these fairly huge scale grain distilleries. And I think a lot of it was shipped south and rectified in England for gin, right? So so it wasn't just a case of making a grain whiskey for a base for a blend or to be sold as cheap whiskey. They were also making high strength clean spirit, minimal flavour. Incidentally minimal. That wasn't the plan, but it was incidentally stripped of flavour. And that would be rectified into gin as well. So that I think that's pretty fundamental. And then if we go through to, I don't think much there's lots of things happen. Phylloxera comes along in between. The Pattison crash, that's pretty seismic. That comes along.
That's quite big.
Yeah, but we get nothing in terms of definitions until 1915. And I would argue at 1915, that's when things get really hammered down. Lloyd George, temperance movement. He doesn't want whiskey made at all. But he's fighting because he realizes there's a lot of bloody money coming in from this thing, and he's the chancellor, so he's torn. Lloyd George, isn't he? I don't really like this alcohol thing, but my goodness, it's keeping us healthy, financially healthy. What do we do? So they end up with throughout from 1915 throughout into the early 20s, despite the backdrop of imminent prohibition happening in the States, which is another event that we won't dwell on tonight. Defining 40% ABV. That's whiskey. That was flavor driven because the producers are trying to get it down to a point, something that they can sell, and the consumer wants something that tastes like whiskey, and they end up deciding it was up and down and all over the place. It was down in the 30s, and it was all these underproof statements. I don't even understand. I don't even remember. We don't really deal in imperial proof anymore. No. And then suddenly they agree on 40%, but they also do another couple of things as well, which is seismic. And that is 3 years is the negotiated term for it to be mature, because it was believed that younger whiskey got you drunk, awfully quick, and it was bad.
I would suggest as well that Lloyd George, again, this is one of these unintended consequence things. This is my interpretation. I don't. But to me, like he's a teetotaler. He's there is written documentary evidence of him being worried about drunkenness affecting the war effort. So my interpretation of this change from 2 years to 3 years is like, well, if I say suddenly 3 years, then there's a whole load of whiskey is not going to be released because it's locked up for another 12 months. So there'll just be less whiskey to drink, So then that keeps everybody sober and working away,
Or fighting away.
Yeah. So to me, that's that's my personal theory. I love a personal theory that's got no basis in fact.
I think it is a good personal theory as well. So what you're talking about there is what happened is that the unintended consequence of him trying to get one thing, he ended up with another thing, and that was quality guarantee.
Well, we all know that young whiskey. Well, most of us, I think, everybody that's a barfly probably prefers older whiskey. I mean,
it's again general statement, broad brush.
Like we love it when we get a 30-year-old dram or whatever. The occasions when we do,
like Sunday.
And yes, there was a few of them.
Which
Sunday,
came second last from the end, but that's another story.
No, let's not do an inquest on that.
But I'm more mature.
Yeah, so and it's even the basic chemistry of that raw spirit's jaggy, and it sits in oak for a period of time and it becomes less jaggy. So if you push it from 2 years to 3 years, then you're softening the spirit. Just like Elizabeth Grant says, mild as milk.
Mild as milk, that's right.
Old man's milk.
Yeah, let's not go back there again. No. So I think what the unintended consequence is from Lloyd George. Thanks, Lloyd. It wasn't what you planned, but you immediately hammered home a quality control measure, and probably gave us something that started to appear like this. The casks might have not have been freshly seasoned, freshly disgorged. They would have been just whatever casks there would have been. There was certainly no definition of oak in 1915, but it was cask. But they did define the size, didn't they? 700 litres maximum. So that's when we start to see, just over 100 years ago, this starting to be locked down, I think. And then, I mean, obviously post-war, we start to see things happening after the Prohibition. The coopers start to negotiate first fill, not first fill, virgin oak for bourbon. So that defines a style over there. And then just as the demand post-war starts ramping up for Scotch, we've got these casks coming from the States as well, which is wonderful that we've been able to get these bourbon casks. That starts to define flavour, I suppose, because these are very, very available and very inexpensive. So suddenly we can start to have bourbon cask flavour. Previously, before that, it might have been American oak, but it would have been the previous incumbent would have been typically sherries or wines, fortified wines probably, right?
There was always in the 19th century for sure, there was a huge Madeira trade to the States that then would have given you a supply of fortified wine barrels. I don't really know much about that era in terms of what was coming from the States.
Me neither. But I mean, what we can see is that if you suddenly there's a lot. I mean, what are the Americans, the bourbon trade, going to do after they've coopered their fresh virgin oak? They've used it to mature their bourbon, in their charred casks, and then they've got these empty casks. What do they do? What do they do? It's firewood, or I don't know. So these are so precious to us, and because we're going in for a longer maturation. So the fact that the sting is not the sting, or the activity has been taken out of these casks suits us perfectly. It's just so serendipitous. And now 95% of the Scotch that we drink today is defined by that bourbon cask, right? Whether it's first fill bourbon or second or third or whatever it may be. I think that's quite seismic. But then there's nothing more. I suppose you could argue that there are other things going on, like the disappearance or the lack of sherry casks all of a sudden because there's no transport sherry happening anymore. So these free transport casks have disappeared, which brings in Paxarette as a replacement to rejuvenate these casks. We don't need to dwell on that tonight. It's a cracking topic, though. And then 1988 comes along, and the Scotch, I don't remember what it's called, the Scotch Whisky Act of 1988. I don't remember.
I did have it on my phone.
Yeah, it's over there in my notepad, just out of reach. The Scotch Whisky Order ratifies it in 1990, and we start to have whisky categories defined. What Scotch whisky is supposed to be.
That's the first time that oak's mentioned, 1988.
That's when
specifically oak.
Yeah, it has to be oak. And so suddenly everybody's disgorging cherry wood and acacia and got chestnut, goodness knows what. But there's still a suspicion that there's ancient stuff kicking about in warehouses that's not an oak, right? And I've never seen it. I don't know if you have, but
no, I've only anecdotally. I've heard some people talking about having records maybe as far back as the 50s that show that oak wasn't being used for everything exclusively.
Yes,
but only one or two. I think. I mean, the advantage of oak is that it's hard and durable. And it makes a tight seal. So even if you are using other woods, and it's like the Japanese, the Mizunara.
Yes,
people use that for flavour, but the excerpt they're going to lose much more of the liquid
because it's still a quirky species, right? But it's not as tight as yeah. And oak is the set. I mean, spirit can permeate it, and that you can have the additive, subtractive maturation going on, interactive thing. But it's not water permeable, right? So water doesn't come in from the outside very easily, does it? Or maybe it does. I don't
know. Can we get a chemist in?
Any chemist in the lounge tonight? So before we get, the final thing is, if we bring us up to that kind of those hard points, is the 2009 Scotch Whisky Act. But that doesn't change flavour too much at all. What it does is it stops people messing around a little bit because of the pure malt Cardew scandal, right, that happened, where Diageo just didn't have capacity of Cardew. So they pulled in other distilleries, mixed it together, put it in the same bottle, changed it to pure malt, and sold it to the same folk. And quite rightly, they get hauled for it. And we're not talking about DCL, a precursor. This was Diageo that did this. And they got hauled over the coals for it, quite rightly so, and they had to change. And then that was one of the events that led to the definitions being tightened up quite a bit in 2009. If you were going to call it single malt, what it had to be, you couldn't say pure or purest malt anymore. You had to call it one of 5 categories that was defined. But that's just labeling and presentation and definitions. It didn't really affect flavor. So here we are today with two. I've poured 2 samples for you. Roddy's poured 2 for me as well, right? And these are blind. It always is with Roddy and I. So grab these 2 and tell me which one have I given you as a traditional example of whiskey, and which one have I given you that I think is an interesting modern take. And the interesting modern take is someone has taken advantage of innovation, for want of a better word, I don't know, in order to stay within the regulations but play a little.
So I've not tasted these yet.
There's a difference in colour, so we can refer to them as the darker and the lighter, right?
The darker one, I think, on first comparison, the darker one is more traditional, I would say, and the lighter one is
typically more modern.
That's my first impression.
I would. Well,
should I taste them?
Absolutely. I think you should just give yourself a nudge. I noticed a few people celebrating their barfly terms. I've probably missed it. It's probably dropped off now. But Sheila, Whisky Central, was one of them, and I missed the other one. I'm not doing a very good job of. Sugar Kitty's in. I'm not technically a chemist, but I play one in sales meetings. Will that do? Yeah, Sugar Kitty, tell us how. I think actually water does get in a cask, because I've seen casks being ruined and being taken out of warehouses because they've been under a leak in the roof, and there's pool of water on the floor. The cask's been, but maybe it's because the water's been just kind of over time. But I think generally, the casks are quite often stored outside and for quite a long time before they're used. And I don't know.
I mean, I can say that in Scotland, in a warehouse, water doesn't go into the wood.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference between Kentucky and Scotland
is remarkably different. Yeah.
Kentucky's hotter and drier. And what that means is that in Kentucky, you selectively lose water from the cask. Like there's more water. You can have whiskies going up in strength, whereas in Scotland it's the alcohol that comes out. So alcohol's coming out.
But the cooler temperature, alcohol's evaporating, and then warmer temperature, it's the water that's evaporating. Yeah,
we do need a chemist to explain this.
Lucas is saying always great to see Roddy around. Cheers. Thanks, Lucas. If anybody's a member of the Barflies, what you want is a Cooper, not a chemist. That's him dodging already. He said he was a... You're right, though, Sugar Kitty. Yeah. I think we've still got access to a Roddy emoji. So I was looking at earlier. Roddy loves that. I think he's got a wee picture of his emoji hanging up in his toilet. I don't know, or something, but he seemed to enjoy it.
In my home office. In my toilet.
It's in your home office.
I would second everybody else's
happiness. Charlie McLean's got evangelist coins from me. Right. These are only the patrons get them, but they were only given out to certain people, and Charlie's got them. And Arthur Motley told me that the evangelist coins Charlie's got them proudly hanging in his downstairs bathroom. But Arthur pointed out it's probably quite a high traffic area, and it's a good place to put it. Jimmy Legg is in, and he said, I do feel ignored, but if Roddy was sat beside me, I'd ignore you too. Cheers, Jimmy. It was good to have you in, buddy. Look at there you go. They're marching the wee Roddy emoji out. Fantastic. So would you say on flavour as well that matches with your nose appraisal?
Yeah, I'd stick with that. The paler whiskies, what you'd call a modern one. You know, it's cleaner. It feels like, tastes like quite an active American oak cask.
Yes.
The darker whiskey, I'm getting a wee touch of sulphur off it, and then there's also something maybe grassy, perhaps.
Yes,
you know, which is a. So this one is sort of, you know, it's fruitier. This one's got these other aromas that are not fruit led, and that's for
Do you know
me.
the Dolan vermouth that we talked about?
Oh, right.
It's exactly
Okay,
what
right,
was
yeah,
exactly what was in my
the
mind.
herbal
right.
thing.
Yeah.
Right, aye.
So there is a kind of, but there's also, to my mind, in this one, it's a wee bit more challenging. It's a wee bit dirtier. Maybe you mentioned a wee bit of a sulphur note there.
Mhm.
This smacks of an old school whiskey. Now, how that comes to be, how that in the process of making this whiskey, because this is something that this distillery is known for. Roddy said it would be obvious to just pour a Springbank, so it's not a Springbank that's in the glass, not in my glasses at least. But there is something a wee bit similar to Campbelltown in this, despite it not being a Campbelltown whiskey. Would you prepare to have a wee stab at who makes a dirty whiskey or a dirtier style of whiskey?
So that grassy thing. Maybe something from Tobermory.
Close, very close.
Close.
Very close. It's a Ben Nevis.
Nevis.
So it's a Ben Nevis 10. And I opened this with you in mind. I had a wee nip myself, and
I'm embarrassed to say that I tasted that very. We had a wee staff training at the shop the Monday before the festival, and that was one of the drams that we tasted. And
well, I'll be honest, this has been on the shelf for a while. You might notice this is the old branding. It's a cleaner kind of white label that's there now.
Okay, so it's a different batch. Maybe?
So it's definitely going to be a different batch, but I think there's still lots of kind of Ben Nevis DNA in play here, and it's difficult. I wanted to, when you say pour me a traditional whiskey, it's like what? So I interpreted traditional as old school in style, whereas this we have something that is clean sherbet, fizzy. As soon as I start to describe this, the barflies will know what glass of whiskey this is. It's effervescent and fizzy. It's very fruit forward, citrus fruit.
It's very bright. You know, it's lots and lots of those sort of bright yellow fruits. Is that Loch Lomond?
Yeah. There we go. But specifically, the reason I've poured you a Loch Lomond, this is from the straight neck pot still, but it's also using Chardonnay yeast. So, you know, who knows what yeasts have been used in the past, but for generations now, mass production of whiskey has been on brewers or distillers' yeast, or a mix of both. There is nothing against the SWA regulation preventing anybody from messing around with yeast.
As long as it's Saccharomyces. Yeah.
What he said.
Well,
I'm sorry.
It says in the.
Oh, and sorry, as a product, that's not a strain or a type. That's an effect.
No, Saccharomyces is the species of yeast that you have to use for Scotch whisky. It says it in the regulations.
Oh, is that right?
It has to be fermented on a substrate of, I forget the wording, but it's essentially saying it has to be Saccharomyces. You can't use other yeasts. So like you couldn't make a whiskey with Brettanomyces.
So I'm glad you're here. so that must mean that whether it's Bill Lumsden that's doing his experimental thing that he did for his Alta, or whether it's Michael Henry down in Loch Lomond that's using, I believe it to be Chardonnay yeast, or wine yeast, that it has to be Saccharomyces yeast. But that would make sense then, because they're using Saccharomyces yeast for those other beverages.
There's loads and loads of strains of Saccharomyces. You know, like if you go back far enough, then every distillery, or maybe not every distillery, but most distilleries many distilleries would have somewhere where they kept their own yeast.
Their own yeast,
You know,
yes.
they cultivated their own yeast, so they would have over time that would, you know, because it replicates so rapidly, it does evolve over time. Like there's is it Carlsberg?
Yes.
They are
Well,
famous.
their beer.
They're famous for having been able to maintain their strain of yeast for well over 100 years. You know, like because they have a very pure strain of yeast that they want to
continue with,
to keep going to give their
and it's
beers.
a differentiator for them. So
yeah. I think these days it might even have its own name. You know, it might be like Saccharomyces Carlsbergiensis or something like that. You know, and you know, nowadays distilleries, they buy in their yeast. You know, so it's looked after for them by somebody whose job is to keep the yeast pure.
I need to keep scanning the chat for
sorry.
No, I'm listening to you fully, and I want you to continue, but I'm scanning the chat fully for the likes of a Michael Henry, just on time. Yes, wine yeast used to grow on grape sugars, so doesn't ferment the available sugars in malted barley wort and needs other yeast to complete the fermentation. But that doesn't answer the thing, the strain.
Yeah, look, this is what I was talking about with Carlsberg. This Bud Jenkins is saying
there are actually yeast banks that store the specific strains from beers and distilleries because many of these develop locally and have a unique flavouring. And I suppose that they need to put in some kind of redundancy that if their store, if anything happens to it, or they need to be able to restart that yeast again. So a yeast bank makes sense. Yeah. Who thought we'd be talking about
yeast? Yeah, you know, you use different strains of yeast and you can emphasize or de-emphasize different flavors.
Yes.
But it does say in the regulations for Scotch it has to be Saccharomyces.
I didn't read all the page.
I mean, it's real, like brewers will use other yeasts.
I did. I did enjoy very much reading through all the Scotch whisky regulations on the lead up to this. I didn't read the 1988 one, interestingly, but I did read through the 2009 Scotch Whisky Act, and I mean, some of it's interesting, and you pause and you digest it and you process it. Some of it's pretty dull, and it's easy to kind of switch off because it's a technical document. That's what it is. But Saccharomyces Carlsbergiensis. So Hels has actually searched it up. That's incredible, Helen. So you were right. Peter Croft is in. Good to see you, Peter. Nice to welcome you.
So that question, Molasses is asking that, like they would take yeast from beer brewers, like brewers knew to. So like it was Pasteur in the 1850s figured out that what yeast was.
Yeah.
Before that, people knew that you had to have yeast to make bread or beer. So people had over millennia learned how to store and keep yeast, and multiply it.
Yeah.
So then, you know, for sure, there's I can't think of any which ones, but there's distilleries that relied on their local brewery to provide them with their yeast.
Yeah.
Rather than grow their own yeast.
Yeah.
So the short answer to that question was no.
No,
it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be a wild ferment.
But there has been yeast developed from local things in their environment that would have become a yeast strain or something that they could have used. But generally speaking, you're saying no.
Yeah, I mean, Scotch. I mean, I'm feeling on shaky ground here because I'm aware that Michael's in the chat.
That's what his job is. That's what he's here to make us feel.
You know, Scotch whisky compared with beer brewers use a lot more yeast because they want a quick fermentation that maximizes the alcohol yield. So waiting for a wild fermentation goes against what Scotch whisky does.
We are in the weeds here. I'm scared to read out some of these comments. Quite honestly, Falsgraf is saying, so a spontaneous maturation, i.e. with added yeast, just using what is in the air would be illegal.
I mean, if you could guarantee it was Saccharomyces,
then no.
But we really have wandered off the topic here.
Yeah. And whiskey. What's Graham? Graham, it's good to see you, buddy. You know what they say: if Carlsberg did yeast, probably the best in the world. What you point out?
So Michael's saying check the 2009 regs and it's saying yeast. Does it not specifically say Saccharomyces? Because it I hope I'm not talking mince here. I've always read it as being that it was specifically Saccharomyces.
Well, it's okay for you to talk mince because we're only in the vPub. So you've kind of led up to 2009.
Yeah, which was the spark that made me pitch this idea to you, because the 2009 is the first time that the word tradition is used.
Well, I actually, when Roddy mentioned this, I did a wee search through the PDF just to see how many times. Now, I didn't search for tradition or derivatives of the word tradition. I just typed in tradition and I found it mentioned 10 times in the regs. So tradition has become a thing that they are leaning heavily on. And I can see why that would cause tension, because what we're talking about then is that we want to look to the past to define our product. And our product is a product that has never looked to the past. It's always kind of about the now, and it's about the as I've just led you through those kind of hard points that I feel, you know, without going into the weeds on everything and everything in between, that they've defined a flavor. At no point in any of those moments did we suggest that, no, we need to fix it now. We need to stop here. We need to lock it in. We need to put a pin here. And I see where you're coming from, because Scotch whisky has to refine and evolve. It's a product of an environment and a people. And it's got to be something. I think it's always come unstuck when it's focused on the past or the now. I think it's become quite stuffy, and I think it has to move. But I don't know what I'm asking for when I say it has to move.
Well,
shall we do a wee thing with your two first before we? Because the second half of it is, I've got a question that I just want to lay down to you in the second half. That's going to spark the second. We've kind of brought us up to where Scotch whisky is right now today, and what's defined that was defined the flavour, and what's brought around the 2009 Whisky Act in order to present whisky to the world and make it look after its quality and also make sure that it's protected. And I understand all of it. And generally, I can see lots of really, really good things in the regs and why they exist. But I've got a question for you, and I'll ask it after you've picked these for the same reasons that I picked my two, right?
Yeah, so I've picked out a whisky that I would call modern, and I've picked out a whisky that I would call traditional.
Ooh. I know we've just been talking about yeast, but the pale one is quite yeast forward. It's quite fermenty. It's quite.
It is, isn't it, Jings? I think that's because it's sitting in the glass. It wasn't like
that. It's almost it's immediately reminiscent of almost kind of Daft Millie Bladnocky type yeast, and then this other one. So this one. So I think just on the nose alone, it's the similar thing. I think the darker one is leaning towards a much more traditional style. Okay, let's have a wee sip. You can read out the chat. Damn, it's Danny Hibington's dram. My goodness, I recognise your logo, Danny. Let's not miss it. Oh, I did.
There's a lot of chat to keep up with.
Oh, I know. But the good thing is
when we're two such weathers.
Aye, and I'm 3/4 of your smoking bishop down. Danny is saying, "Good evening, Roy and Roddy. Great to see Roddy bringing his t-shirt again. T-shirt game again. A game again. Slancha lads. Listen, I said to the guys that I was a member, but I've let it lapse. But I've got this t-shirt because it was one of the.
It's a very cool t-shirt.
Aye, it is. And if I'd known you were wearing it, then I could have.
I mean, and they're a lovely bunch of people as well.
They are, but I met them. I met them all at the. I didn't meet them all. I met a group of them going around the Glasgow Whisky Festival. Just happy. Yeah, it's whiskey. Yeah. Whiskey makes good people happy. So this is remarkably similar to what I've poured for you, I think.
So
and it's
treacle. I think it's quite treacly.
I think it is. It is treacly. It's kind of it's quite dry and fruity, and it's a wee bit tannic. So there's a good lick of oak in here, and I think it's mostly sherry-led oak. It's not just about the colour. I think it's there's a good lick of sherry in this.
That is correct.
And this one is much brighter and lighter, but it's a wee bit funky too. But it's funky in a different sense. This is like funky from the fermentation side. This is funky from maybe spirit and cask, but mostly cask, I think.
Do you want to hazard a guess at either of them? So let's see the left-hand one, the paler one, and the right-hand one. Which is the modern and which is the trad?
Right now, I'm second guessing.
I'm
I'm going to go with my gut because I'm trying to. What I'm doing is I'm second guessing because I'm trying to put myself in Roddy's head, and that's a scary place to be. So I'm thinking, I think I'm going to stick with my gut feel that the darker one is a little bit more of a kind of old school, traditional feel about it, a bit more kind of heavy, and quite challenging. It's a wee bit like. You guessed Tobermory. For me, I'm going to guess Tobermory back. Wrong.
It's Ben Nevis.
No.
It is in fact this whiskey here.
Oh, so I was just about to mention. So I was thinking. I was thinking lead chick.
How do we do this?
You just offer it up there and wait till it focuses. It does.
So I emptied out the last of this to have an empty bottle.
This is John Bortle's bottle here, who is yet to come over and collect it. John Bortle, Ralphie gave me this to celebrate 10,000 subscribers, which was a while ago. But John Bortle has got to travel over and pick this up. So I'm keeping it in storage for him, but that's the full bottle of it. So there we go. Look, 154 of 155. I didn't even notice that. Yours is 42. I better not smash that, John. But the peat was making me thinking electric. So okay, I guess Tobermory for your Ben Nevis.
The same way.
Or both tubes. Okay. No, I think it's a reasonable guess on both directions, honestly.
Yeah, I mean it's the funk, the grassiness.
I'm not going to play Is It Speyside with you, but I'm going to just go with, is this a Glenmurray?
No. Do you remember? I know it's only 5 minutes ago, but there's been a lot of chat. Do you remember what you suggested it reminded you of initially?
Daft Mill or a Bladnock. It's a Bladnock. It's a Daft Mill.
It's from Fife.
Oh.
It's not a Dafty, but it is from Fife. So it's one of the new Fife distilleries. But
Kingsbarns?
Nah, I'll show you. It's just the things I've overwrapped that.
What could it be? Which Lindors is it? The dyslexic challenging one. Okay, it's the Roman numerals, the MCDXCIV.
Yeah, so their core product.
Yeah,
which is matured in.
Now, is it something like 1494 or something in Roman numerals? I can't remember how they get to that. I can't read Roman numerals.
So M's 1,000, D's 500, but you subtract C, which is 100. So 1,014
is 1494,
and then you take X away from C, which is 10 away from 100. So 1490, and then 1 away from 5, which is 4.
1494.
Those Romans were crazy.
Yeah.
So it is 1494. Yeah.
So there you go.
But I picked this.
That's incredible.
Because it's for sure it's an absolutely modern distillery, and the mature in STR casks and sherry and bourbon, which is a very modern. That's Jim Swan's recipe for whiskey that can be matured and put to market younger, but they can lay claim to being in the place that the earliest written record of Scotch was made. You know,
Anybody that's
so
planning to stay till the quiz at the end should be paying attention right now. I think
Roy didn't know I was going to bring a Lindors, so if
right, we are not on. This is the vPub. Nobody buys me any whiskey. Nobody can buy me. I buy all my own whiskey. But I tried last week. I tried a Lindors, Casks of Lindors, the sherry cask.
Oh yeah,
It's Coca-Cola. It doesn't have the mouthfeel of this. It's a little bit thinner on the palate, no doubt. But it's an absolute flavour bomb for 60 quid. A full-on sherry experience from a new distillery. I bought a bottle, whole bottle from the pot still, shared it out to all the barflies. It was 35ml pours in the pot still. And I bought a whole bottle in a bon accord the next night because it's an easy, efficient way for me to pour whiskey for everyone that's there. Everyone came back saying, what's this? What's this? What's this? This is good. This is good. And the pot still on the Friday night, people were guessing that it was the new 12-year-old Sherry Royal Brackla or even the Glenturret 12.
James.
Which is super flattering, I think,
That
for a
is
very
indeed,
new whiskey.
aye, absolutely.
Now, okay, tired palates at the end of the night and things, there's loads of caveats, of course, but I think it speaks volumes for the fact that these new distilleries are coming along now and they're not punting 3-year-old product anymore. They've got some years under their belt and they're using that more mature stock to bring their product on. And we are getting to taste these things snapshot by snapshot by snapshot going forward. And they are working rigidly within these definitions that we have today. So my question to you, I'm leading up to, you've got the SWA regs in your hands and you can rewrite them. You can allow them to be more flexible for innovation. I've got my ideas down in a notepad down there. Can't read it from here, but I think I remember them. What would you innovate? What would you change in the regs if you could?
So,
because we don't want to dwell on attention. You mentioned that this is not a kind of a rant. We don't want to, but there's a way for us to talk about challenging or asking questions at least enter into a debate about what we have today. Surely that's not going to be appropriate for what we have in 10 years or 20 years time or whatever it may be, maybe longer. What would Roddy change?
So the whole reason for me pitching this tradition versus innovation thing to you,
which
Roy,
I think is a cracking topic,
is that I'm deeply invested in Scotch. I make my living from it. I enjoy drinking it. A load of my pals are the same.
You love it.
I do, yeah. And it's it's a lot of fun. But I worry about that historically, if you read the history of Scotch, and the industry has always been up and down, boom followed by crash, followed by boom, and I'm concerned. Not concerned is
mindful.
I would like
mindful.
I would like to cheat. I would like things to be better, and I worry about that introduction of the Scotch being defined as traditional is going to ossify. It's going to it's going to make the industry seize up. Because if you think about all of the innovations that have come into Scotch, you talked about the column still.
Yes.
So there's a new kind of still that other drinks producers are using called an eye still, which is it's not picturesque at all. It's a little square steel cube, but you can make all kinds of interesting drinks. There's a really interesting rum producer in Orkney who's using it. I don't think you'd be allowed to use that under the current regulations.
Sure.
Or if you would, it would be consigned to the. In fact, no, you wouldn't, because it's not big enough. I don't think. There's the we touched on the event, the circumstance where Glenmurray's cider cask was deemed to be non-conforming
overnight. Yeah,
and yet, like cider's I know that's one of my other things, but cider's an integral part of the history of Britain. So you can be blooming sure that in the past it would have been cider.
We'd have been
casks.
using cider casks.
Yeah.
And tell me, is cider matured in a cask, or does it just a storage vessel?
No, you would.
You get oak aged cider.
Yeah. It's a different product from if you mature it in tank.
Sure.
Because you impart the oak flavour to it and it oxidises. There's one of the best producers, Ross Y.
Yeah.
That both Albert and his dad Mike, they love Kalila, so they love using Kalila casks. So they have a smoky.
So they get our casks, but we're not allowed to use their casks. I have to say, the cider cask thing always bothered me a wee bit. It bothered me a bit.
The contrast to that is that all of a sudden somehow tequila casks are acceptable, because I'm blooming sure, I want to swear here, but I'm not going to. I'm blooming sure that there would never have been a tequila cask in Scotland before.
I'll swear for you, it sounds like a lot of shite. Because it sounds like it's a convenience thing.
Yeah.
So what we're actually doing is, I don't think there's anything wrong, by the way, with maturing whiskey in a tequila cask.
No,
but to say that you can't use a cider cask and then allow a tequila cask, that sounds like something Liz Truss would come up with.
And there's all these wine casks. Like, wine casks are acceptable generally, but then there's all these varieties of wine casks that would never have made it to the UK before.
Yes,
yes. And they're suddenly somehow.
We agree on that. That's on my list. So I would innovate that. Yeah, I would say that if we can use oaks.
Well, I would even say to confine ourselves to oak is foolish. Like I've been lucky enough to taste Scottish malt spirit that's been matured in other woods, and I would love it if there was a chestnut whiskey. Chestnut.
Well, I've tried Irish whiskey from a chestnut cask, right? But okay, you can't. It's a very small sample. One, I didn't particularly love it, but it's not something you can judge on a single experience, right? Did you enjoy your experience with chestnut casks?
I mean, I've tasted. So especially in Italy, they use all kinds of wood. So we get lots of spirits that have been in different kinds of wood, and it's just such a lovely flavour. I think.
Well, it does. To say you said concerned is too much, but I do think that Ireland can use any bloody wood they like. They're not constricted to oak. And I do think that what we've actually done is we've kind of done this when it comes to casks a wee bit, and then when we double down by saying yes, that can be used, and it's tequila. Tequila is.
Michael's saying tequila casks is a long time. We've had them since 2015. That is not a long time, Michael. Come on.
No, and certainly it's 6 years post the traditional. The entry in the 2009 regs, but I mean, I like we're saying, Michael. I don't think we don't have an objection to them using tequila casks,
but they're not traditional.
It's an oak cask, but I do because cider casks. I mean, it's almost like cider cask doesn't fall under the stone fruit definition either. So if there's any kind of stone fruit, fortified stone fruits, plum, peach, apricot, that kind of thing. That's not permissible either, even if all the other parameters, oak cask, scale size, everything. That's odd to me because they're talking about they want to preserve, and I do feel like we're getting a wee bit high horsey, but that's okay. They want to preserve
if I was in charge,
the traditional Scotch flavour, aroma and flavour associated with Scotch whiskey. I understand why they want to do that. Has anybody tasted an active port cask and what it does to whiskey? I mean, it doesn't. It leaves you tasting not much of the whiskey. The whiskey has to be high ABV and a powerful spirit to work well with a port cask. Maybe a long row. Maybe there are whiskies out there that do bring along a good experience. But what you're tasting is so much to do with the previous incumbent. So much.
It's like Ribena and Starbursts.
Yeah. The argument about changing the flavour of. Look at what Billy Walker is doing at Glenallachie. Billy, I take my hat off to you. You've done amazing things. It's a cask story, but you're doing amazing things. We're not tasting a lot of Glenallachie yet until his spirit comes along. And what he's done is he's brought flavour from the cask. And you could, it becomes very nebulous when you talk about how to define the flavour and aroma of Scotch whisky.
Well, I mean, this is like none of the regulations or the laws really talk about flavour. You know, they're all about process and geography and so on. But it's you know, what's that hilarious line about the spirit is distilled to no higher than 94.5, such that it retains the flavour of the original ingredients. You know,
Yeah,
as if you could taste anything at all in a 94.5 vodka.
Yeah. I mean, it is up there. It's right at the point of compromise, right up there. But I mean, that's what we're talking about. Column distillation there to be up at that height. That's not typically what malt distillation goes up to, but
it still counts as Scotch.
But it still is Scotch, and it's in the definitions
because 200 years of using column stills has embedded it into the Scotch landscape.
And that's one of the problems that you and I don't think we might have touched on it on the live already, but before we went live tonight, one of the issues I have is that we have these regulations that are trying to cover two separate spirits, two separate drinks, and they are different. They're using different grains, they're distilling in a different way, and but the definitions, the limits, the parameters are covering both of them. I think one of the things that I would change is definitely maturation. I want to talk about inner staves. I want to talk about the way we treat casks and the way we keep casks and manage casks and get more out of casks, because it's a precious resource and it's becoming more precious all the time, but not because we're worried about the planet and cutting down trees. It's becoming more precious because there's more demand for them. It's the money thing again, right? But it doesn't matter. I'll take it whatever way it comes. It's going to be a more precious resource. So we need to think about, you know, the Scotch whisky has been defined today by external influences. And the flavour that we enjoy today has been defined by external influences. The flavour of bourbon has been defined by the cooperage, unionists, the unions of the coopers back in pre-war. Single pot still Irish has been defined by the taxation of the Crown on Irish whisky production and how it was taxed. So they made a different style of whisky, and it became defined by that. That's happening in real time now, and we've locked ourselves down to here and now. There has to be some form of a broader view to say, well, inner staves, has that been used before? Then beyond that, does inner staves actually do a good thing, a positive thing? You and I bloody know the answer is yes. We know that it does. Is it a positive thing? Are there compromises that come as a byproduct of that practice? Look at all of these things, but right now we saw what happened in Spice Tree 12 years ago. It was just they were told to take it off the market. They can't sell it so they got around it in an innovative way. The barrel head ends were toasted French oak instead of inner staves of toasted French oak. Great, they managed to keep a product. But I felt that was a wee bit, and I know that it's a popular opinion, that was a wee bit short-sighted. But I don't know. I don't know how to extrapolate it. I don't know to see what the net effect would that have been. We would have stopped using good casks and just used any old crappy bucket to put our whiskey into and then put fresh staves in. Would that have been the cheat? That would have been a way forward? Because I don't think that would have been a good outcome of that. So there's other arguments to have. Peathead is saying throwing a stone, let loose all the regulations, but only if full transparency on the bottle is applied. But that's us kind of. I think there is an argument that Scotch whisky has to be definable as Scotch whisky, and I think that would then be competing with the rest of the world with any old thing. I don't know.
I mean, I think
inner staves are the same as using small casks. Increased surface area of wood in contact with spirit. I think that's a nod from Michael to say he wouldn't mind messing with a few inner staves. I don't want to overinterpret
put words into his mouth.
Yeah, or what to type into the chat.
Aye.
But the other thing I was going to suggest that I would change is, I mentioned it. I think I've talked about it, is the idea of trying to define what malt whiskey is, where we also try to cover what grain whiskey is. And I think we've saddled ourselves with a pretty difficult often uses the term trying to separate the spaghetti from the sauce, right? I feel that they're
So that I'm actually before the chat, Roy and I were trying to get this clear in our heads, and
I don't know why, because we're quite happy to turn up and waffle. We're okay with it, but in order to have
it's good to try and be a little bit coherent sometimes. So I was saying to you, Roy, that one of the tricky things that took me a long time to get my head around is the line in the 2009 regs that says the only kind of whiskey you're allowed to make in Scotland is Scotch whiskey. And I read that and I was like, what does that even mean? Obviously it's Scotch whiskey, but then I was like, ah. So that's a lawyerly way of constraining how you make Scotch, and it's so that people can't play fast and loose and make other products and call them Scotch. And what I've come round to, and you've kind of triggered it just now, is that there should be two categories. There should be single malt pot still whiskey, which is what we all hear.
We're malt lovers.
Yeah, we're malt lovers, and that's where the interest is, because there's
definable flavour.
And there's maybe 200 distilleries now in Scotland. Adding in the 70 new ones of this century. There's approaching 200 distilleries, all making something different. And if it's malt whiskey, then that gives us so much liquid to play with and to taste. I think there should be a looser category.
I think active malt distilleries were at 134. That are the majority now, for the first time ever. The majority now. And by the way, for anybody that watched the vPub last week, that's what Roddy was referring to, the 70 distilleries. If we look at work in progress, currently producing but not released, but currently producing and released distilleries this year, if we add them all in, it adds up to 70, which is frightening. But for the first time ever, the balance will tip. The distilleries will not exist to provide a consistently flavoured product that has to meet a certain list of parameters to provide a product for blends. They will exist to make whatever they like, to make the best flavour forward spirit they can, to be sold as a single malt for single malt's sake.
There's a really interesting question from Ian Bruce. Does that restrict American, Irish, or the light distilled juice being matured in Scotland? Well, remember, we had that Irish whiskey bottled by Cadenheads, and it was on the label. It said it was a 6-year-old, but if you added up the dates, it was
much older.
Yeah,
because they can't conclude the date, the time it was matured in Scottish soil.
It had sat in Scotland, but that doesn't count as part of the maturation because of the rules. But yeah, to come back to my incoherent point, yes, we should keep the single malt pot still category because that's precious and it gives us all these delicious liquids. But we should have the grain category should be broader so that you can do what the Irish do and play around with wood and enzymes and mixed mash bills and
throw your caramel colour in the grain.
Yeah,
chill filter your grain.
I feel this is a good time to bring this in. So this is the James Eady book.
This is a huge investment for any whiskey geek. It's £150. But Roddy, it's like right. It's a very small snapshot in time. This is only 6 years. I think it covers in the 20s. But the images in this book alone, and then it doesn't matter what page you open and start to read, you just get sucked in. It's like a whiskey teleporter, this book. Yeah, it's incredible. But Roddy opened it up and said, as if to state a point, and I'll let you.
So I literally flipped it open, and the page I came to was Hazelburn in Campbelltown, December 1922. And
podcast style. There you go.
Oh, thank you. So it starts, Hazelburn Distillery is one of many in Campbelltown that have recently come under new management with exceedingly beneficial results. The change of ownership in most cases has taken the local trade out of an old-fashioned rut that was slowly paralysing initiative and diverting the eyes of the distillers from the up-to-date methods that modern science has placed at their disposal. And I'm concerned that the emphasis on tradition. I mean, this is the 20s. You know, it's not a great time for Scotch because prohibition's kicked in. That there was the getting over the First World War, but you know, the Scotch whisky industry, there's still innovation going on, and we can go back. You know, we can list so many
But that's prescient. That's prescient.
There's the column still. There's you know, the innovations in terms of malting. You know, like the Saladin malting boxes and
the way the definitions are set out today. If somebody come along with Saladin box as an idea, which has been and gone by the way, but still an efficiency issue. Drum malting's made them redundant, right? But or if somebody come along with a coffee still, if Aeneas turned up today based on the current definitions, he would okay, the current definition has been written around his invention, but you see my point is that if he turned up today with this new thing, they'd say nope, we can't have it.
It's not traditional.
It's not traditional, and we can't take it on board. I wouldn't want it to come on board because potentially we would have just malt, and I would want that to be protected. But what Roddy's point is, and I think what I've touched upon as well, is that if we separate out these two different drinks, we're suddenly in a position where we can look at things differently. When we speak about Scotch whisky, the majority of the product that's exported, that's made, that's sold, where all the money comes from, I suppose, is still blends. 60% of the value, 60% value, 90% volume. Malt whisky is much smaller in terms of volume. Product that's sold as malt whisky, of course, a lot of it is sold through the blend component, but the value is much, much higher. When we are precious about Scotch, when we lean on that Hollywood product placement, a halo image of Scotch, when we have the flavor moments, when we have the Scotch that can make us close our eyes and transport us to different places, ethereal experiences, we're speaking about malt, I believe.
Funnily enough, to go back to Aeneas MacDonald, so he finishes his book.
Show them this book because they can buy this book.
Yeah, this is
fascinating book.
This is a reprint of a book from 1930. Aeneas MacDonald is a pseudonym
due to temperance, because his mum was a teetotaler. Right?
The writer was embarrassed to admit in public
that he was a jakey.
But so this book is all about malt whiskey.
Yes.
And he in places throughout the book he rails against silent whiskey, as it was still called in those days, so grain whiskey. But he finishes up his book by talking about a blend. I'm gonna just quote this because I'm not coherent enough, but it's just talking about that experience that we're all always looking for when we're
flavor
drinking whiskey.
Right?
So this is a quote from a short story in which somebody tastes the divine nectar, and the drinker. So it says, it's merely material parts where it is true, pleasant enough. They seemed, while you sipped, to be honey, warm sunshine embedded in amber and topaz, the animating essence of lustrous brown velvet, and some solution of all the mellowest varnish that ever ripened for eye or ear, the glow of Dutch landscape or Cremona fiddle. No sooner, however, did this probable sum of all the higher physical embodiments of geniality and ardour enter your frame, and a major miracle happened in the domain of the spirit. You suddenly saw that the most freely soaring poetry, all wild graces and quick turns and abrupt calls on your wits, was just the most exact, businesslike way of treating the urgent practical concerns of mankind. And you know, sometimes you're with pals and you taste a dram and you put the world to right. And you know that's this precious liquid, but he's actually talking about a blend there rather than a.
Well, I think I was kind of thinking as I just said what I said is that that's coming from the mouth of a malt fan, somebody who's particularly precious about malt. I think the other thing that's on my notepad down there as well, and I think it's not something that is debatable. I think there's one thing that I would change that is absolutely unforgivable, is that they snuff out information for the consumer. They deliberately mask consumer information by not permitting. Okay, I understand why they have age statements the way they do, and if you put a 3-year-old in there with a 10-year-old, it's a 3-year-old. I understand all these things, but you should be able to say on the back, 10% of this is a 3-year-old and 90% is a 10-year-old. You should be. Whenever you find yourself in a discussion or a debate over a glass of whiskey about whiskey, you can pretty much guarantee that the Pareto's principle will apply 80% of the time. You're talking about transparency. To not have transparency in the day of the internet is a fool's scenario. It is just, and it's building and it's building, it's building. And we can debate whether added caramel colour is a good thing or a bad thing. It's debatable. We can debate if chill filtration is a good thing or a bad thing. Natural whiskey. All the things that we've discussed tonight are debatable, really. Transparency is not. It's not. The idea that you, oh no, you can't say that. And then you can't justify why you can't say that is not permissible to me. And I think that would be another thing I would change immediately. A producer can put, maybe in the front of the label can stick to what the current 2009 regulations, but on the back, if they want to go into more depth and they want to give people access or more information about what the actual makeup of that whiskey is, the only reason to not permit that is because it shines a light on people who do not. And I think that's my own kind of conspiracy theorist type attitude on why that kind of mask scenario still exists. Arguably, the one I've saved till last might be the first thing I would want to change. But is that innovation, Roddy? I don't think that's innovation. I think that's why I put it as a kind of footnote, because it's not. Okay, and it is innovative to tell the truth in commerce, I suppose. But it's not, strictly speaking, is it? It's just kind of being, you know, the rest of the world isn't very good. America's not doing a good job. Japan's probably one of the most opaque producers out there. We're doing better than most. We really, truly are. And I think we should always remember that. But I still think we should strive to be the best at that. When I say we, I'm obviously talking about Scotch whisky, and I know that for so many of you guys out there, we love all whiskies. We are not, but we have to be honest. Our comfort area, our education, our love is founded in Scotch first and foremost. We're very happy, as you've seen Roddy on here, drinking elephant dung smoked Namibian whiskey together, thanks to Stefan Novak, right? And that's tasty. And it was you loved it, right? I enjoy it. And the company got in touch with us wanting to send us a case of this stuff. I was like, no, you should have told them my address. I should have, yeah. No. We just wanted to talk about it and things. We tell us where to buy it, we can buy it or whatever. But that one was at the time only available in Germany. But that is the thing. That's the takeaway, is that I think that we are speaking from the perspective of Scotch lovers, malt lovers, and all of those things, but we're also speaking about just taking pride in it and loving it and kind of wanting to be a wee bit mindful and protectionist of it. And Ben, Whisky with Molly. Ben, you were a fantastic help on Sunday. You were a fantastic team captain. You were a fantastic water deliverer guy. Ben's obviously into events, and he was very mindful of the whole dynamic of the room, and he was reading when people needed something and jumping in. Thank you, my friend. It was terrific. To all my team captains, to Scotty Monroe, who's ended up a wee bit poorly, to Sevi the Alchemist, who was the energy, the dynamo, the guy with the tombola.
And such a good bar person as well, Sevy.
I
He
know.
was loving
Aye.
working the bar, wasn't he?
Scotty told me a great story where Ben went up and said, you know, okay, I realise I'm slacking a wee bit here. I should pitch in and do the bar pouring and things. And Scotty said, no, son, you're fine. I'm having a great time. Ben's like, okay, no bother. So it just shows that it's the reason that we were loving that is not the whiskies we were pouring. It was the people we were pouring them for. It was just getting people together again, and it was great fun.
I talked to so many people on Sunday. You know,
but you're Roddy, so they're sitting there saying, "Oh, Roddy's here!" So they're excited. They're like, "Oh."
You know, like people that I've known through the chat on here or on Twitter or I was saying to you the people that are on the shop virtual tasting, so they're a tiny wee square.
Yes.
You know, but to meet people in person was quite a day. Really quite a day.
Aye, it was. It was absolutely fantastic. And I guarantee that for all the people, as I keep saying, that weren't able to make it, we will be doing that again in future. There will be more of those, so please don't get despondent. I know that a lot of you are like, oh, I don't want to see any more of these photos. They look amazing. Falscraft is saying, I had my hand in this. I made them aware of you talking about it. Namibian guys. Thank you, Falscraft. The guy was dead excited and he got in touch through social media. But he saw it as a business opportunity or a way to you know, that we'd already done a pretty good job of that. I would have a bottle of it on the shelf. I really would, but it wasn't expensive.
It was super interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, as a drink, I mean, there's a nice kind of fun story behind it too. But we've got Floki with sheep dung, and we've got on Jabba, I think it was called, the Namibian whiskey. I'm going from memory now. Peter Lee saying, count me in for the next event. No chance, Peter. You would have to take a day off work.
Yeah, Peter, you don't get in unless you're dramming this time.
Well, no, to be fair to Peter, he hadn't reserved a seat.
No, I know.
I sat him to the side and I said, look, if there's a no-show today, you're in. And he was sitting there, he was praying. I don't know, I don't know what he gave up. But there was a no-show on the day and there was a spare seat. And I said, there you go. So Peter was able to slide in, but he was driving, so he could only do the challenge by nose and things. He was in your team.
Aye.
He ended up in your team.
He did, well, I won't say what my score was, but
no, you didn't.
No, not as good as my teammates.
I'll tell you. I didn't know the individual scores. I knew the team scores. I knew the things. But I think the team... On Jabba, there you go. Stefan's in. I think that the team element added a great dynamic.
Yeah.
Because it meant that people were pitching in. And the fact that we separated, I felt really bad because there was father and son turning up. And there was kind of young couples and Bea and Alfie. They were split up and sent to different tables in this new environment where they didn't know everyone. And I realised as they were coming in the door, maybe this is too much of a crowbar.
But the thing is, though, that, like, I mean, all right, socially, it means that you've got to work a little bit harder, you know, because you have to introduce yourself and all that. But, like, one of the things that I'm very aware of, because I taste whiskey in several different contexts, is the groupthink thing.
Absolutely.
You know, you drink whiskey with your friends and you tend to go down certain channels of discussion, you know. So to drink whiskey with new people who use a different vocabulary or assess things differently, it's fascinating, you know, and it's
different experience levels,
super eliminating
all the way,
all
the way around the table, different. And I was looking around the tables, and there were a few that were kind of that were weighted. There was kind of more experienced folk in more numbers, let's say, and there were other ones where there was kind of more naive folk. But interestingly, one at the table that won that night is a table I couldn't measure the experience around. They did. Now, there's a lot of luck and fortune. It's only kind of 5 whiskies and it's not scientific in any way, but there is some kind of work to be done. And I really tried hard to make it quite definable. I said I wasn't throwing any banana skins in that blind taste and I just wanted to drink good whiskey. But it did still trip people up.
Do you know
one person?
I don't think I told you this, but the Alfie and Bea, like me, they're also interested in cider.
Is that true? Is that right? Good.
And
they were great.
I met them at Cider Salon, which is a big event down in Bristol in July. And I sort of vaguely knew them from whiskey tastings, but it was so confusing to see them in their own context.
Out of context, yeah.
It's like, You know, I mean, I'm sure all weekend you're saying hello to people and you kind of know them, but you also don't. So that it was doubly so for that, you know.
Aye,
But
aye.
then, like, by the end of it, we'd figured it out. So they came into the shop on Monday morning for a wee chat as well.
Smashing. It was great to have them there. It really
Aye.
was. It was great to have everyone. It was just a
Yeah,
great
yeah.
event. So lots of people are asking me if there's going to be an event in Edinburgh in 2023. There's no plans, Lowlander, for an Edinburgh event. The reason I do the Sunday after the Glasgow Whisky Festival is that people are travelling in already for the Glasgow Whisky Festival, or if they're thinking of coming in for my event, they've also got the Glasgow Whisky Festival to attract them, to make it, you know, a no-brainer or something that's worth the while. The Glasgow Whisky Festival doesn't really clash with many other events, so hotels around the city are still quite reasonably priced. I didn't hear of too many people getting overcharged for hotels. A lot of them get really quite inexpensive hotels. So it was great fun. Michael Henry's saying Tombola worked a treat.
Tombola was brilliant.
Never a break in a chat. Brilliant way of mixing it up and a chance to speak to people you wouldn't have otherwise had.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And then after the blind challenge over, everybody just gets up and drifts off and it mixes up aye, that was the kind of idea behind it all. Do you think we've made any coherent points or arguments?
I mean, I think we've gone over. You know, we've talked about the innovations in Scotch. You know, that have come in over the last couple of 100 years. And I've got on my high horse about how I would like to see the regulations changed,
as we both have a wee bit. Yeah.
I think you know, we've at least, you know, talked about what I was wanting us to talk about. You know, I don't know that, as ever, when you and I chat, Roy, I don't know that there's ever a good conclusion.
That's the point of it. And I don't think if we do start to conclude things, it probably means that we're just pleasing ourselves. So I think we just want to.
If I was in charge,
yeah. I think so. We just want to talk and start the discussion, because what happens in the comments, people come in afterwards and say, "Aye, but you never thought about this," and that's frustrating as hell. But they're right. We didn't think about that. So the conversations, it's not just Roddy and I kind of shouting. It's everyone. Listen, if you're up for staying for the quiz, you might find that a lot of the questions in the quiz might relate to the topic tonight. Just some of them. Are you okay for a comfort break?
Aye. What do we do?
Are you sure?
You mean, do I need to go pee?
Yeah.
No.
I'm going to abuse the fact that he's here, and I'm going to give you the magic mouse to scroll up and down the chat if you want. Both chats will move at the same time. If you want to pause one, you can pause one. And I'll leave you chat to the crowd. I'm going to abuse the fact that I've got a fella here.
Type things in here and it'll be in your name.
It would be. That's absolutely true. But
so no sweary words.
No, I don't mind at all. Carry on.
And
we'll be back.
What have I done?
Okay. Okay, that's a bad thing. You hit the mouse into a corner. So if you hit the mouse into the corner like that, it just cleans up the screen to get the desktop. So you don't want to. So just be gentle with the mouse.
This is why you were asking me earlier about if I ever
use a Mac. I don't really need to.
No, you're fine. You're fine, Roy. You're fine. So I'm not going to try typing at all, because oh god, I've done it again. I've broken this. The very minute he leaves the door, the chat vanishes. There we go. Right. Who else uses a Mac? And yeah, Alan, no need to type, but if you put the mouse in the corner, then the whole screen vanishes. So yeah, I'm not going to, my hands are well away from the mouse. Cross out the second word on that shirt. Hiking. Well, the funny thing about the Hip Flash Hiking Club is that whilst all of us do like to go climbing, we're very, very bad at organising climbs together. So we do a lot of whiskying together, and we all go hiking separately. But I think we've been on collective climbs about 3 times in the whole existence of the club. Brian's going to come on. Brian, the organizer, the founder, is going to come on and say that's not true. But no one uses a Mac. Jimmy, you know what? I'm forced to use Windows computers at work, but for me it would be Unix all the way. But let's not go down. That's another rant for another night. Right, Malt Brother Ray, that's a really interesting point. New innovations should be treated just like medical devices. I think that's a great idea. There should be like a experimental category where you get to do crazy stuff, and it's labelled as a sixth. What are the 5 categories? Grain, malt, single grain, single malt, blah 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 blah. There should be a 6th category for Scotch whisky, which is experimental, and you label it as such, and people know that they're getting something that's not what they're used to. But if you're buying it knowing, that's a great idea. Sadly, I have no power to enforce that. I broke it again, Roy, but it's come back.
You broke it and fixed it.
Well, I don't know what I did. So there's a good question. How are new distilleries influencing the bigger whisky environment?
So Ben, that's my entire topic of last week's vPub. New distilleries and the I felt like Ben was in last week, but maybe not. But I argued a lot of positives that the new producers are coming on, and the impact that they're having on variety, on price, on presentation, on lots of dynamics. But one of the things that we haven't touched on tonight that I did talk about new distilleries is if we talk about the whiskey in our glass today and this notion of tradition and things like that, it's all of it. So much of it has been about the incidental environment around us at any one point in time. Whether it's about collecting money, or whether it's a reaction to a world event, or whether it's something else has usually bumped whiskey in a certain direction. I think whiskey's under a lot of pressure right now, like the rest of us are, and that's down to resource.
Mm-hmm.
The resources are becoming more and more precious, or if the word isn't precious, it's expensive. So it's precious is the same thing. So they're going to be forced to look at things a bit differently. And I talked about how 2 vPubs ago, cask strength whiskey is going to be suddenly much more appealing because it's far less resource intensive to take a cask strength whiskey and put it in a bottle rather than vat and chill filter.
2/3 the number of bottles.
Yeah, all of that. The presentation of whiskey, and it's the kind of geek in me getting all excited that suddenly more naturally presented whiskey is more appealing from an environmental perspective. Generally, packaging, extra cardboard, the amount of bottles that you need to use, the amount of cork.
We are seeing, I know that it's partly making a virtue of necessity, but we are seeing packaging
disappear,
being reduced.
But at the top end of premium whiskey, they know no limits or borders. It's becoming. I feel shame when I see some of the packaging that's come out, and
then that's that's kind of a different market, Roy.
It's the Halo products. We know.
You're selling a Macallan Lalique to the people who would happily drop £500,000 on a fancy motor car,
and they're measured in the dozens or the hundreds rather than the multiple thousands that we're consuming. I understand, I get it, but a Halo product just doesn't mean Halo as an aspiration. Halo is Halo in all respects. So if people pick up a naked bottle in a shop and they're coming into whiskey and they see the Macallan, the Halo product, enshrined in a thing that you open, and it's I think it's the image is stuffy too. It's stuffy and exclusive, elitist. But that's me talking.
We weren't
going to rant.
No, but this is comedy though. Like we had I can't remember which brand it was, but it was a big fancy box, which then had a kind of wee suitcase on it. But you got the whiskey out, the box out, the suitcase, and then you were like, okay, how do I do this? And then there was a wee clicky drawer that popped open and had a key. Then you unlocked it. That was hilarious, that one, because the key.
What's hilarious about it is if you were to be in the room where somebody was presenting this, and I'll give you a wee dram, and you have to pop and then pull out the key and things. You'd have to really hope it'd be smashing. Ben, Whiskey with Molly's asking Roddy, do you think we will see co-releases from the likes of Linkwood, Dillue, Glenord, etc.?
No, definitely not. No, they're too important for blending.
So we've got a Flora and Fauna for a couple of those. But Glenord, we've got the Singleton.
They're an afterthought.
Yeah. Even the Singleton.
The Singleton, the branding is such that if need be, they can drop another distillery into the range.
Yeah, that's right. The Singleton of Dillue, the Singleton of Mortlack. 250 quid. Yeah.
Maybe not the Singleton of Mortlach.
I did say that I was just going to stop talking about Diageo and the vPub. But the problem is that I love the distilleries. I love visiting the distilleries. I love what the whiskey that comes out of the distilleries. It's everything that happens after that that just goes to.
I mean, you know, I was talking about that hip flask tasting that I was on 2 weeks ago, which didn't feature slankets, but featured
Udies.
And one of it was the theme was one of the group was presenting 6 of his favourite drams. One of which was the Flora and Fauna d'Albion.
Nice.
And everybody loved it, you know.
Absolutely.
Like it's just a whiskey that
it is.
That you kind of just like afterthought.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many Flora and Fauna whiskies that
46% unchill filtered, it blew us all away. I'm pouring a wee treat for you, Roddy. Here's something here if we talk about innovation, and this is within SWA regulations. This is actually a Loch Lomond. This was available at the festival.
Colourless.
It's new make, but it is new make that's made with 70% malted barley and 30% malted rye. They're doing experiments with other things. 70% malted barley, 30% oats, 30% unmalted barley, so single pot still Irish style type of things. Now, Loch Lomond are very, very fortunate that they have the ability to do this kind of thing. But I was thinking that what we're talking about here with 70-30% ratios of mash bill, any distillery could potentially do that. So cheers to Loch Lomond for innovating within the, oh my goodness.
The skunk works of Scotch whisky.
They are a wee bit, aren't they? I always say Kilkerran's the skunk works of Mitchell's though.
Aye.
It is new makey. And there is the rye's making itself known, I think, a wee bit here. There is a wee bit of a kind of sweet, fresh grass type.
So I'm getting what I'd call gingerbread, which is for me is a rye note.
Ginger is a rye thing for me, definitely. I didn't.
Also quite soapy.
Is a wee bit like potpourri or something, or
I don't know the.
But rye for me, even bullet rye can have a soapy potpourri note to me. Floral. Did you sip it yet? No.
No, I'm still. It's really interesting. So on the nose, at least, it's not bready the way that a lot of rye is for me. You know,
this is a very selfish thing. I know that no one else out there can taste it. It's quite thick and like new make can be. Interesting, right? Wee bit of spice.
I wonder where it's going to go.
Aye. Well, I mean, this suggests that, I mean, they haven't just made a wee bottle of this. I imagine there's thousands and thousands of litres of the stuff.
Yeah. I wonder, you know, like I'd love to taste that, you know.
Mature. Yeah.
We need to wait for a bit, but that is, you know, that's not like Scotch or my mental model of Scotch. You know, it's
not even Scotch new make.
No, and I've like, what's the Arbiki did a rye, but I think it was 100% rye.
And it was 120 quid.
Yeah. And that was really, really good, but the price was just
I found it a wee bit challenging, but and I would have had a bottle, but the price was. And the second, they released the second one that was a bit cheaper. The idea is that maybe they'll get economies of scale or they'll work out cheaper. But
the Borders Distillery have just released a similar kind of thing where it's 2/3 malt, 1/3 rye.
Which is this, more or less.
But that's whiskey. That's 3 years old.
The Borders release.
It's just I would suggest, like certainly my response to the Borders one, and also to this one, is that I want the rye content to be higher. I want the barley in there as the fermentation substrate, you know, and I want to be able to just taste the.
I want.
Well, yeah,
but unless there's consumers out there saying, "I want," what's this?
I mean,
you've got.
You know, if you're going to make a rye, then make it rye. You know, because that was the Arbiki was 100% rye.
Yeah. like I say,
I want right now.
I want. I wonder what is actually happening. This is just one sample I've been able to acquire here. I wonder what is actually happening behind the scenes.
Maybe there's a range of different ratios, mash bills.
Well, I mean, it's super exciting for all the folk out there that love the Chardonnay yeast, that there's going to be some more releases of that. Mature, because they've been making it since 2006 or something.
I've still got a wee bit.
Aye, so they've been making it for quite a while.
I could nose this Chardonnay yeast endlessly.
Aye,
it's fascinating.
Aye, for me, this is going to sound like a negative thing about it, but it's not. I mean, it's in a very positive way. The palate is fragile, it's brittle. It's kind of like it lands on your palate and it breaks up and dissolves and fizzes away. So imagine like a wave when it comes up on the smooth sand, and as the wave recedes, it leaves all just white foam that just kind of fritters away. It's difficult to. It's a texture experience, not a flavor experience.
No, I'm persuaded by what you're saying. I see that. I get that fizziness. What would you say were some other fizzy whiskies?
So there's a very interesting thing, because somebody came to me recently and said, "Roy, I'm out of your Loch Lomond. I've gubbed it. I loved it. What can I replace that with that gives me that same sherbet prosecco effervescence?" was the words, and I'm like, oh my goodness, because it does exist. We've had it in occasional other whiskies, but for me, it tends to be a single cask type experience rather than a core range that was fizzy to me. The closest other thing that we had is 2020's Loch Lomond, the open release. They only had 3,000 bottles out because of the COVID pandemic. There was no open competition, so they released 3,000 bottles of Chardonnay yeast. That's close, but it's difficult for me to find fizzy whiskey. Rye is a fizzy whiskey. Rye can be fizzy.
That's interesting. That's not my mental model of rye. For me, rye's about the spice and the flavour rather than the texture. But that's me. Yeah. That's my.
Well, sometimes in rye, I get, if you have sushi or anything, and the pickled ginger that you get, very thinly sliced pickled ginger.
Right.
That I sometimes get that in a glass of rye. Famously in America, a lot of Americans talk about dill pickle in their rye, and because I've been led there, I taste it now.
I get the dill thing a lot.
Yeah,
dill or caraway.
Yeah, but also I can often get potpourri. I can get that kind of.
So to answer
lime and ginger soap type thing.
Right.
Yeah,
lime
go ahead.
And ginger soap.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I might have made it up my own head. But.
To answer my own question, the core range fizzy whiskey for me is Bruichladdich, classic laddie.
Really?
I see that as a fizzy whiskey.
I'm suddenly wanting to go and pull a Bruichladdich off the shelf and try it. But there's one more I want to try in our last two clean glasses, and this is going to do us into the quiz. But this is a weird ass thing. This is actually distilled beer.
Oh yes, aye.
So this is
not.
I imagine what so it's not.
Hops.
So whiskey is distilled beer. Let's be honest, but it's not flavored in any way. It's just it's wash, as Roddy says. It's
no hops.
There's no hops. There's no flavor in it. But what we've actually got here is beer that's been, and I'll show you what this actually is. This was a gift to me from a pal, Keith, my buddy Keith. He brought it round to say and we opened it together. And there was a few of us here that night, and we opened it, and we had some drams on the go. We had this, and we just shoved it off to the side, and we were a bit rude about it.
So,
my goodness, this smells like a freshly opened shoebox of leather suede shoes.
West Coast IPAs.
You think?
Dank.
It's dank.
Slightly sweaty.
But it's fresh. It's a brand new pair of suede shoes.
That would be something I've never possessed.
I don't have a lot of suede shoes myself, but I know what suede smells like. And there's a cardboardy element, like a freshly opened, like a new pair of shoes in a box.
I like this.
Dude, I bloody knew you would. This is right up Roddy Street.
It's the funk, man.
Listen, everybody that's indulged this so far, over 2 hours. I often apologise for the Roddy sessions that it's just me kind of hanging out with a pal, but you don't seem to mind it. In fact, a lot of you seem to really enjoy it, and I'm grateful if you do. leave us a wee like if you do. And what I'll do is I'll put the wheels on the quiz. The quiz has evolved over time, and I'm sure you've been in it recently.
I need letters for this, don't I?
No, it's only you on your own, so you can just say it.
All right. Okay.
So you can relax a wee bit in the first 5 questions because they tend to be super easy, and then it starts to get a wee bit harder in the second half, and it usually ends up in an ASAC question or 2. But I always think I've lowballed it. But like I think I'd lowballed the blind on Sunday as well, but it turned out to be really tough unless you're Alfie. Alfie, I almost said Ralphie, didn't I?
Alfie.
Is this the Elvis dram? I know Malt Brother Ray saying, had a lucky bastard beer brandy last weekend from a Dutch distillery. Hey, where are you, Malt Brother Ray? Where are you in the world? I felt like you were in the UK. Danny Havington is saying, come on, Roy, you have a sweatsuit, admit it. Aye, Danny. If I did, I'd sell it and buy whiskey with the money. Ethan Sterling is saying, please don't apologise. Thanks, Ethan. Thank you very much. And Whiskey with Molly Ben is up for it. He's saying yes, the quiz. Okay, let's see if I have managed to successfully do a decent job of the quiz this week. Let's pull it in. Remember, it's multiple choice. Just stay and have a wee bit of fun with it. You're only playing against yourself, honestly. Roddy, you're only playing against yourself tonight. Tell you what, for everybody, Roddy's the pass mark tonight. Whatever you score is the pass mark. No, that's horrible. So that's horrible to everyone.
Should I try and deliberately get things wrong?
Well, that's what my brother worked out, is that he came on to have a quiz. He didn't want to come on a live stream, but I bullied him coming on with the quiz at the end. And he said, so if I'm really rubbish, they'll like me more because I'm the pass mark. But he still tried his hardest. he still did his best. Okay, question 1. Good luck, everyone. The famous Exchequer rolls, quote, 8 balls of malt to Friar John Corr, wherewith to make aquavitae, was from which year? You don't need to say it out loud the news. Pause a wee while. Was it A, 1494? Was it B, 1644? Or C, 1823? Now, all of those years have been mentioned throughout tonight. And remember, of course, these are easy. They're super easy. Hopefully, they're super easy. But Friar John Corr, can you send in 8 balls of malt for which to make aquavitae? What year was that found in the Exchequer rolls? And of course, let's not dilly-dally. Let's not mess around.
Somebody's even just claiming 1 out of 1 with it.
Ethan's like, yeah, claiming 1 out of 1. Spot on, 1494. I even mentioned it tonight.
Repeatedly.
Yeah, I did. Repeatedly. Now, I can't find where it says in that image there. To be honest, on your screen, it certainly will be low resolution. But I've blown it up as much as I can. I can't make out any of that text.
Like writing of that age, I can't read.
It's very difficult.
The type, not the type,
the script.
The script.
But I also think that when it is typed out, I mean, Bernard's book is Amos MacDonald. The way that's written, it can be a wee bit fun and fun, but it's still readable. But Bernard's book, and when you read passages from that, sometimes how much we've evolved in terms of how we write language is quite stunning, right?
I think Bernard was being paid by the word, and that's why there's these vast run-ons. It's in.
Whiskey with Molly it's just pointed out. Ben is saying, "Hey, Roy, the Exchequer rolls is written in Latin." I'm zooming in, getting the best resolution image I can, and zooming up. I'm wondering why I can't read it.
There we are. Then.
Aye, there's one born every minute.
Anyway,
right?
moving on.
Question 2: in which new distillery is often associated with that very entry? Which new distillery is often associated with the Exchequer rolls of 1494? Is it A, Kingsbarns in Fife? Is it B, Lindores Abbey in Fife? Or is it C, Eden Mills in Fife? Eden Mills in Fife as well, yes.
The Snook.
Yes. I don't enjoy this.
2 out of 2.
Greg in Paris is claiming he's 2 out of 2 already. Absolutely. I'm enjoying the fact that the quiz starts off quite easy, but absolutely spot on. Lindores Abbey is Roddy quite incidentally. There's nothing planned about that. He pulled out of Lindores tonight. as an example of his modern whiskey. Question 3. Which significant event in Scotch whisky history happened in 1644? What happened in 1644 that changed Scotch whisky and its history forevermore? Was it A, tax collection driving illicit whisky? B, phylloxera decimating brandy consumption? Or C, Burns wrote Scotch drink? There's a chance it could be this, but not an answer to that, right? So it should still be fairly easy.
I mean, Burns writing that in 1644 would have been.
You're genuinely enjoying this, right?
I am, yeah. Like I like the hoppy element of it.
That's not Scotch whisky, though.
No,
it could never be Scotch whisky.
There's a kind of a perfumey thing that I guess you would never find in Scotch.
Aye, Scotty Monroe would say, "I'm off it." I find it. I don't know if it's perfumey.
I mean, I don't know if I would, like, if I had this, I don't know how long it would last, you know? Like, there's some things that you can happily revisit 2 or 3 in the night, and you'll be like...
It's not that, surely.
No, I don't think it's that. Because it's, you know, it doesn't quite have that kind of welcoming richness to it, but the flavours are really interesting.
Absolutely, guys, you're kicking out the park on this one as well. It's 1644. Becca Thor is just putting a wee happy face on her answering D. A, tax collection driving illicit whiskey into in order for people to keep making and enjoying their whiskey.
3 out of 3 so far.
3 out of 3. You're 3 out of 3. Yeah, 3 for 3. Keep it steady.
Yeah.
Which of these 3 distilleries is currently accepted as the oldest? Now, you can't know this in advance.
No, this is the banana skin.
You can't know this in advance. Yeah, there's always trading places, but which of these 3 distilleries is currently accepted as the oldest? A, Bowmore, B, Tobermory, or C, Strathyla? Now, you're wondering why Glenturret isn't there. Because I'm not asking about what is the oldest Scotch distillery. I'm saying which of these 3 is the oldest. First, banana skin, because I have been very deliberate about the selection here. Something tells me that this cruise speed won't last, says Greg's Whiskey Guide. Greg, you're absolutely spot on. I think you find that the cruise is just disengaged. These are so clever, right? Sugar Kitty.
I'm not looking yet.
Uh-oh. Isoamyl acetate warning. That must be a banana reference, right? Yeah. Absolutely terrific.
I'm going to go A.
4 out of 4, Rodders. 4 out of 4. Lots of people saying Strathyla. Strathyla, 1785. What was the other option I put up there?
Tobermory,
1798. It's emblazoned across the bottle, embossed. And Bowmore, 1779. Wow, my gut agrees with the crowd, says Falsgraf. So yeah, Bowmore, by far the oldest Islay distillery, but also of those 3. And I think the second oldest distillery in Scotland, behind Glenturret. They did try to claim to be the oldest distillery when they found something that was in the same era as Glenturret. Glenturret is 1776 or something, 1775. But Glenturret have just discovered documents going back to 1763 to suggest they were in rude health in 1763. So, yeah. So there you go. But out of the 3 selected, A was the answer. Going on to question 5. It's always a picture. Supplied by Graham Fraser, as always. So he's playing for 9 out of 9 tonight as well. Yeah, I think he should still play for 10 out of 10. This looks like a few distilleries to me. The 3 distilleries that this looks like to me are A, Glendillon, B, Speyburn, or C, Dufton. Which distillery are we looking at? That's all we're asking. Quite simple. No ass hattery. But it is not an easy one, I suspect, this evening.
I had it down as my initial response was that's a different Dufftown distillery. So jinx. I'm going to go A again.
So did you think? What did you think?
Oh, I'm not going to say. Because the more I look at it, I can see that I was wrong, but I immediately thought, oh, Dufftown.
I think there's quite a few distilleries that's on a kind of slope like this,
Mhm.
with that kind of brickwork,
Mhm.
with these kind of warehouses going down the slope and stuff. But this is according to Graham Fraser, so if I'm wrong on this, I just like. I have come unstuck by not checking, because it wasn't because of Graham's mistake. The way that Google attached the images wasn't out of sync to how he lists them. And I just put a picture up once and didn't double check it. And I haven't double checked this one actually. But everybody's suggesting that it's Speyburn. The majority of the crowd say it's Speyburn, and they're right, because they're knowledgeable whiskey folk, dedicated barflies, and it is Speyburn. And before you leave tonight, that's the one I have to let you try. I know you've been like, well, why are you still banging on about Speyburn?
The 15.
Yeah.
So that's me, what, 4 for 5?
Yes, 4 for 5. Still a strong score. One more for a pass mark. Question 6. I feel bad about putting this in, but I'm going to do it. Murray McDavid released an interesting range called Cask Craft very recently, demonstrating maturation effects across a wide range of malts. But why might Roy predictably whine and whinge? Despite this being a really cool concept, I love the concept, there's something about it that's making me have a whinge. Is it A, too low ABV? Is it B, crazy out of touch prices? Or is it C, superfluous use of extra packaging? I don't know if you'll stock this. You probably will, actually, at the Good Spirits Company.
I don't think we've not been offered it yet.
Well, it's not. It was at the festival on Saturday. A fella come over to me, a really nice guy. I had a nice chat with him and things, and I did feedback this thing, and he was just rolling his eyes, going, bloody whiskey. Like, but I'm predictably going to have a whinge about this, because I think it's so good a concept.
So I did bypass their table, and I saw that they've simplified the packaging. They've gone to cardboard.
Okay.
Which is better.
So it's a 50-50 for you now.
Yeah. I know what my choice of answer would be, but based on the fact that it's you, I'm going to go A.
Spot on deduction. Absolutely. I've got a wee image here, and it is very, very interesting, because we've got a great selection of single malt whiskies here. We've got Croft and Gee, we've got Linkwood, we've got Dilluin, we've got Glenelgan, we've got Strathdairn, which is a Tomatin, I think. Strathdairn's Tomatin. Pretty sure it's Tomatin. Don't quote me on it. But we've got a fantastic range of single malts here. But what we're looking at is the specific difference that different casks make on a whiskey. So you can buy a wee collection of these, a wee flight of these. And look, we've got Marsala, we've got Port, we've got, what does that say? Madeira, is that?
Looks like Madeira.
Madeira, bourbon, sherry, and peated. But the peated isn't peated malt; it's a peated cask. So this is a nice flight of whiskies, right? And they've gone price point, fantastic, £34 each, superb. Should have been £38 each. Why?
To make it 46.
Because it would have been 46% ABV. They wouldn't have filtered it. And I know it's the geek argument. I know it is, but it's just for geeks. You've pitched it right at the geeks. I had a bottle, 6 bottles. And I sat down and I poured flights for my friends. Amazing. And it's 44.5% ABV. It doesn't mean that it's going to be bad whiskies in those bottles. It doesn't. But it's so close.
Wait a minute. Did you say it's not 40? It's 44.
44.5.
Oh, come on.
So close. So, but the point is, Roddy, they've chill filtered it. I don't care about what the ABV is. I care about the fact that they've chosen to chill filter it.
Okay, right. I see. Okay. No, I'm with you on that then.
Still, £34. I'm not gonna knock them too much for it, but it's
just bottle at 44.5 and then chill filter anyway. That's silly.
It's not meaner fish, right? They've done something.
Right. Yeah, that's silly.
They've just done something odd. They've got almost everything right. It's like the open goal volley, and they've just scalped it right into the back. You're still going to applaud the good effort, but you're just not going to be able to celebrate.
So close. So close.
Question, sorry, Murray McDavid. Sorry, guys. I know you're doing a great job. Otherwise, question 7: visiting which of these distilleries would take you closest to the historical landmark of Kennet Pans? start to get harder now, don't they? Kennet Pans is a fascinating thing that I know is very close to Roddy's heart. But if you're ever in the Central Belt and you're doing a wee whiskey tour, would you recommend that people try and get a wee squint at Kennet Pans and understand the history and what that represents for Scotch whiskey?
I think we didn't talk about it. I know you and I talked about it a lot in the run up to tonight, and I think it's
we skipped over it. I think.
Well, yeah, it's an important artifact of the history of Scotch, but you really need to
touch it
to be there, to see it. Like you can see it when you drive past it, and it's an interesting looking ruin, but you kind of need to know the context. And that
I think everybody would look at that ruin and they wouldn't realise what it actually was.
I think it's a
but
real shame.
Roddy sent me a bunch of photos. Some of the photos you sent me, there's a millstone lying half broken in the ground.
Yeah.
And half covered in ivy, and it's just this half a millstone, and it's like,
I mean, it was a huge place, and they had everything that you needed to make Scotch. There was I think 5-story malt stores, and there was a grain mill, and do you know those pictures of that wall that's got the big circular cutout?
Yes.
So that's where the flywheel was for one of the first ever Watt steam engines in Scotland.
Oh my goodness! Yeah,
a massive steam engine, because it was
one of the first steam engines.
Well, this is what I was talking about earlier about innovation in Scotch. The Steens and the Haigs, they had the Kennet Pans had one of the earliest powered railways in Scotland. It had between Kennet.
Some sources say the first railway.
Well, there's horse-drawn railways earlier than that, but the first
steam powered.
The first powered railway. One of the earliest canals in Scotland ran from Kennet Pans to
Kilbaggy.
Yeah, which is entirely gone.
The village is still there, but what
was Kilbaggy is now a paper mill.
Oh, is that right?
Or a recycler. It used to be a paper mill. Anyway, so there's so much of the history of Scotch is on that site, and yet we don't do anything with it.
Yeah. Or there's probably not enough money. But what I'll do is after this is I'll share. All I wanted to know is which distillery would you be closest to if you were going to visit I was looking for a distillery with high footfall so that you could go down and have a wee squint at Kennet Pans. It's quite a thing. Would it be A, Deanston, B, Lindores Abbey, or C, Tullibardine? What would you pick, Roddy, as your closest to Kennet Pans? Sorry to everybody that's joining in tonight.
Gee, Jings, that's...
Falsgraf is saying no idea what Kennet Pans is. I'm going to give you a web link, Falsgraf. Yeah. I think you're going to be absolutely fascinated. And Petehead is saying, point up for any non-Scot. And I agree, Frank. I agree. But I think what we're talking about here is whiskey that you don't know, or whiskey history that you perhaps haven't heard about, which I think is why Kennet Pans isn't invested in.
Yeah. Man,
just pick one, Roddy. I'm going to tell you.
Deanston.
Spot on. You'd be about half an hour from Deanston. You'd be about 45 minutes from Tullibardine, probably from about an hour from Lindores. Or maybe I got this back to front. But if you're in the Central Belt, if you're visiting distilleries, look up Kennet Pans and have a wee look. There's a whole website dedicated to the history of this place. And they are actively, I've put the link in here, kennetpans.info is the web address. I'll link it obviously tomorrow when I do my housekeeping in the morning. I'll link it underneath as well. But it's a fascinating website just to go and read and understand just how significant a part of global whiskey, global whiskey production, not just Scotch, this site has. It's fascinating.
I'm sure Graham Fraser will have a lot to contribute to that.
Oh, aye, absolutely, no doubt. I've not seen Graham in tonight, but it's rare that he's not in. But, aye, there's no doubt. Question 8.
So, I think I can claim 6 out of 7.
6 out of 7. Pass mark in the bag. Who carried a prescription, Roddy, ensuring he would have access to whiskey while he travelled in the US during Prohibition?
No idea.
King George V. Winston Churchill or Albert Einstein? One of those guys during Prohibition had to go to the States.
I'm going to go with Churchill. It's a pure guess, though. It's a
That's
1 in
fine.
3. 1 in 3.
But this guy was going to the States and realised that, wait a minute, I can't get my booze when I'm in the States. So a doctor gave him, and this was common practice during Prohibition, the amount of people that needed whiskey and as a tonic, as a health, as a pick-me-up, as everything. Lefroy was a very popular one, apparently. A, King George V, B, Winston Churchill, or C, Albert Einstein. I can tell you that Roddy's right. Winston Churchill.
That was a pure guess, Roy. That was.
Well, look at this. This is amazing. Look at the way this is written. This is to certify that the post-accident convalescence of the Honourable Winston Churchill necessitates the use of alcohol spirits, especially at mealtimes.
Look at that. The quantity.
No, I can't believe this. It's brilliant. The quantity is naturally indefinite, but the minimum requirement should be 250 cubic centimeters, which
It's a
is
third of a bottle.
Is that not? I don't know what I thought that was 2.5 liters. No, it was 250 cubic centimeters.
Is that not a third of a bottle?
So that would suggest that
Yes, 750 milliliters.
is okay. Okay, 700
so
for us.
That's 75 centiliters. Is that not a third of a bottle? Can
So
somebody,
it's the
somebody
equivalent
who's
of a
good
centiliter.
somebody who's good at maths tell us,
Okay.
is that a third of a bottle?
Well, that
or-
certainly makes more sense. But he's
Even
gathered
so,
I know.
a third of a bottle.
Winnie Churchill. I mean,
But there's
a quarter liter. So yeah, a third of a bottle. Yeah. 250 cubic centimeters guaranteed to be supplied to the boy a day. But probably it's not whiskey till it's shared. So he was probably getting some in for his pals as well. You'd
I
have
don't
to
know. I
think.
mean, it was Churchill. Like
He was drinking it in his bath
so.
with a cigar.
Well, so one of the other things I'm interested in is the champagne, and supposedly during the war, when he was in charge, he was provided with a bottle of Paul Roger every single day to kick his day off.
That was his breakfast bottle.
That's the story.
There's a brilliant video by the Whisky Tribe.
Do you know? Sorry, when Winston Churchill died, for the next 10 years, Paul Roger had a black border on their labels.
For
real, for
wow,
real. Yep.
Wow. The Whisky Tribe did a fantastic video. It's super fun, where they attempt to drink like Churchill for an entire day.
Oh, Jesus.
And it's just that's all I'll say. Just type in the Whisky Tribe Churchill. It's just a great. It's not. You're not going to learn a lot of whiskey education, but you're going to have fun watching it. And you're probably going to learn a wee bit about Mr. Churchill. Anyway, question 9, second from last. Believed to be the oldest known whiskey. A bottle of Old Ingledew was sold at auction in 2021. What era is it believed to be from? The oldest known bottle of whiskey. A, early 18th century, B, early 19th century, or C, early 20th century. Old Ingledew.
Sounds American. I'm going to go B.
B, early 19th century.
I have no idea again.
It doesn't sound Scottish.
No, it doesn't. Oh, it could be Irish.
I don't want to lead anyone.
No, I'm going to stick with B.
Julian Rickman's bought us a wee dram. How nice, Julian. Thank you so much. Reed Scott is saying, Sir Winston, are you drunk? True, dear lady, but you are ugly. In the morning, I will be sober. Oh, he was cruel as well, wasn't he? He was. Julian Rickman.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Julian Rickman has bought me a dram, but no comments. But Julian, thank you very much, my friend. Cheers. I'll sip the last of Roddy's Ben Nevis, which is nice.
Well, I've just finished your Ben Nevis. Move on to.
Fastgraph is shouting pass mark because I am voting with Roddy. Absolutely, buddy. Do it. Mark is saying I'll circle back on the replay, but wow, this was a long one. Snowstorm preparations. Yeah,
it's always a long one.
I know it's 2.5 hours. I abuse the fact that you're here, and I just treat it as a hangout.
Weather.
I can tell you that Roddy's spot on, early 19th century.
It was a pure guess, right?
But this is pretty fascinating because they found a bottle and they've been doing the carbon dating on the liquid, and they're finding a bit of a change. You know, the liquid suggests early 19th century, but the bottles come in a wee bit later, as you would expect. But I knew that you were not going to pick early 20th century. Why? Because you remember you and I drank a bottle of 19th century Hoy whiskey, a blended malt, a 21-year-old blended malt bottled in 1905. So it was made in what was that?
1884.
1884. So maybe I get the dates wrong. I feel like it was 1886, so it would maybe potentially be 1907. But it was a Hoy. It was Angus poured it at the Old and Rare, and it was
because Kat and I were filming at that point. When we were still doing the Whiskey Woman.
But how fresh and tropical was that whiskey?
It was, wasn't it? Yes,
it was it was incredible. But there you go. They've Old Ingledew is now officially the oldest. But remember, this has not been matured in oak. We're not talking about a couple of 100-year-old whiskey.
Old bottle effect.
We're talking about an old bottle of whiskey, and I've got a wee picture of it here. It doesn't tell you anything other than there's been something photographed. But the suggestion is the bottle, the embossed bottle that it's in, comes later than the liquid, which makes sense because it's distilled and matured. And I don't know. Lots of questions. $137,000 somebody paid for that bottle of whiskey. So somebody was into it. Finally, there is an ASHAT question at the end.
So I'm on 8 out of 9 just now.
I think the ASHAT's doable, buddy. I think it's doable. It is a bit of an ASHAT. 10. The top 2 producers in Scotch whisky, Pernod Ricard and Diageo, own 41 operational distilleries between them. How many producers, though, own just 2? So instead of 2 producers owning all these distilleries, how many producers have just 2 distilleries under their umbrella? A, 2 producers own 2 distilleries. B, 6 producers own 2 distilleries. Or C, 10 distillers own 2 distilleries. I have a point to make about this question, and it's kind of rolling on from last week's vPub where I talked about new distilleries. I think it's interesting. I need some lubricant on these creaky chairs. They've been making a lot of sense.
They are quite.
We're not farting. It's the chairs that's going.
Well, Roy is, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I can only think of one just now because I'm 5 drams in. So I'm going to guess that it's 2 because I can only think of 1. So if there was 6, I would be able to think of 3 or 4 maybe.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go A again.
I have to get your reckoning. Roddy thinks that there are only 2 producers in Scotland that make that own 2 distilleries. The crowd is very heavy for 6. A few Bruce Bernard. That looks like Bernard. It looks like a new name, Bruce. But you're a barfly. It's nice to welcome you in, buddy. You're going for C. You're going to guess it. J&A Mitchell is 1, right? Yeah. Kilkerran and Springbank. Absolutely it is. I can tell you that there are 6 producers.
Jings.
So you made 8 for 10 tonight, Rod. That's still a great score. Still a superb score.
That's the pass mark, 8 for 10.
Yeah. And in case you're curious, here's the Glenmorangie and Ardbeg are owned by Moy Hennessy. Loch Lomond Group have Glen Scotia and Loch Lomond. Angus Dundee, Glencairn and Tomintoul. Isle of Arran have Lochranza and Lagdow, both in the same island. Mitchell's, as mentioned. And Gordon MacPhail have been Rowick and the Cairn since summertime this year. Are now
as soon as you
producing
put the list up.
it's clear. It's clear. Yeah, of course. But what's interesting here is that, look, what we've talked about, this explosion in whiskey distilleries and production and things, expansion to capacity to existing incumbent distilleries. But we're also seeing a confidence now that either people who have new distilleries suddenly have another new one, Arran, or people who have a renaissance scenario are suddenly going again and bringing something else back. Okay, Glenmorangie brought back Ardbeg. Loch Lomond arguably brought back Glen Scotia. A lot of investment there. The same for Tomintoul, a relatively new distillery in 1965, bringing back Glencadam. Glencadam was closed at the start of this century. Lochranza starts up, and they immediately invest in Lag. Springbank bringing Glengyle back on place, and then Benromac brought back to life from Gordon MacPhail in 93 or something, and now another distillery on place. So it's not just new distilleries, it's new distilleries investing in new distilleries.
Jimmy, no, there will always be cocktails, mate. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I vote for Roddy to visit the vPub monthly, but with a no cocktail rule. Oh my goodness.
Even if it's only whiskey and ginger ale.
I took a wee sip of this when it was cooled down a minute ago, and it's still easily drinkable. It's still bizarrely smoky. There's a wee bit of a cigarette ash note to it.
I mean, it was a cask strength Kahlua. So,
but you've gone with the smoking bishop theme,
and
you put a smoky whiskey in there. We could do a non-smoky whiskey and see how the flavour switches up and changes.
I think a really fruity whiskey like Loch Lomond could work.
I like your thinking, Jimmy, but you and I'm worried that you'll fall out with me if I tell you what's happened to my cocktail ingredients collection since I've been speaking to Roddy and Sarah at the Good Spirits Company and everybody there. Matthew gave me a new one to try, the paper plane.
Yeah, that's a great drink.
I'm missing the Amaro.
Amaro. Get there,
So okay, how did we do? But Danny Hebbington is shouting about Andrew Butler. Andrew, I finally picked up your sample kit from the Bonaccord last week, buddy. Thank you so much, my friend. Maybe we should liaise a wee bit to work out what I've got to do with that, because I think you've suggested that Leanne at Scotch in the Bayou has got the exact same set. And if you've got 10 out of 10 tonight, buddy, that's amazing. He is. Huzzah. He's celebrating a 10 out of 10. Andrew, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. Well done, sir. Well done. Elsewhere is saying, great geeky and fun vPub with you and your partner in crime, Roddy. Thank you so much, Helen. And Ethan Stenner is saying, thanks to Roddy, I'm going to make a batch of smoking bishops without whiskey for the family this holiday.
Well, if you're not using whiskey, then you do need to use
something to fortify
a spirit. Like, so the traditional thing would be brandy.
Maybe a sweeter or something.
Yeah, brandy, sweet, fruity. So,
aye. And I think I'd be tempted to try it with a non-smoky whiskey or like a really rich sherry whiskey. We don't want to waste too much. How much whiskey's in each bottle, would you say?
So it was a bottle of red wine, a bottle of port, the juice of 3 very large oranges, and a quarter bottle of Casks strength Kahlua.
So it is quite a significant amount of whiskey you have to give up, but you're making a lot of product that you can keep for a long time.
I really didn't plan it, and then I'm like, I've got all these. What am I going to do?
Like Jimmy Legacy saying, I am with you. There's a lot of anti-cocktail things going on here. I must admit, I wasn't a huge cocktail fan until I tasted a few smashing cocktails. And they have a place. I don't think it's a vPub. Because I think, as Roddy and I have demonstrated in the past, a strong cocktail can set you well on your way. But Roddy's told me in the past, a cocktail, and the intention of a cocktail is to have a cocktail or two. And that's it. That's what you do. And if you're drinking, if you're making any more than that, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, there's Dorothy Parker, who is the Algonquin club set. They were like barflies, they were very into their booze, but she was also a great writer, and she says that about cocktails. I'm going to mangle it. I'm sorry,
it's fine.
But it's something like I love cocktails. One at the most. One. I love a cocktail. Maybe 2 at the most. If I have 3, I'm under the table. If I have 4, I'm under the host.
Oh.
So yeah, cocktails. They're. I mean, is this the place to explain the definition where the word cocktail comes from?
Tell us.
Right. So this is
this rude?
A little bit. So David Wondrich, who's an incredible drinks writer, he's American. He writes about all drinks, but mainly American focus. He's discovered that. So in the early 19th century, there was lots of words used to describe this kind of drink that's strong, and you only have one because it kind of wakes you up. So there was I can't remember them. There'd be like a brain clearer or a defoggerator. But cocktail is the name that stuck. But before cocktail was a drink, a cocktail was something that a horse dealer would do. If they were selling an old nag, they would stick a piece of fresh ginger up its bahookie. And then, because that's obviously burny, the horse would be prancing around the arena with its tail in the air, desperately trying to get away from this bit of ginger. So that the idea of a, I'm sorry, Roy, I told you it was not. So the idea of a cocktail is that it's like, oh, Jesus Christ, the bear, get going. Sorry, I'm swearing. And that's what a cocktail is. It's a drink that, okay, let's go.
Listen,
so I'm sorry for lowering the tone.
If the chat suddenly fills up with Roddy emojis, you'll be forgiven.
but that's if you haven't read any of David Wondrich's writing about drink, he's the boy.
David Wondrich, Roddy gets
the Yongo, a whiskey sour with a PTI malt. I would absolutely second that. Yep, whiskey sour with smoke.
Amazeballs says Yongo. Good to have you. Look, there's everybody giving you your forgiveness. Filling up the chat with Roddy emojis. And Nicholas is throwing in a wee Roy emoji as well. That's nice of you. Terrific. Oh, buddy, I've had fun tonight. I don't know how succinct we were. I don't know if we came to any conclusions, and I don't know how well we kind of argued our case, but we weren't going to argue it. It wasn't about that. It was just about suggesting that I think that whiskey has always been a product of its place and its people and the moment in time. And as soon as we tie it down and try and lock it and I don't know, put it in shackles, I'm not suggesting that we have the immediate need to go out and change everything, but as we've talked about tonight, there are some things ripe for changing. Certainly at least talking about changing. Yeah. And I've enjoyed it. I know we've been 2 hours 40 minutes, but put it down to the smoking bishop. But I could sit here for another 2 hours and 40 minutes, hanging out with all of you guys as well. And of course, because I'm sitting here next to my pal Roddy. Listen, it's been fantastic to hang out with you. We'll be back to normal business next week, where it's probably just going to be me sitting here monologuing to you about my latest grind topic, whatever it might be. And until then, I'm going to raise this glass and just say a very grateful thank you. You're all very dearly loved, and I look forward to welcoming you back here next Thursday night. Cheers, fella.
Chin,
cheers,
chin.
Roddy. Thank you.
Here's to us.
Slanch it.